All right, we are live and welcome back to the second half of the Joint Corporations, Elections and Political Subdivisions Committee meeting. We are done with this morning's topic and kind of knew this was going to bleed into the afternoon either way. So I'd like to say we're actually on schedule. We're not really behind. Next, what we're going to do, committee, is we're going to review legislation that we already had drafted, and then we will have time to take up any additional proposals of any other legislation. As far as the legislation goes, what I want to do is entertain a bit of a straw poll from the committee. We could spend the afternoon going through all these bills, but what I'm really curious about is based on the testimony, emails, and probably phone calls that I know I've received, and many of you probably have received the same, that there may be, I'm hoping there's a consensus that some of this legislation may not even move forward. And if that's, at least that's my opinion, and if that's the case, then I don't see the committee burning time on it. So I kind of want to get your opinion, committee. Is there, out of these 5 bills, is there, we got Senator Scott's bill is 24 LSO 0229. So we'll hear that one. We'll go through that one. Are there others?
I would suggest that we lay back 24 LSO 0231, the moratorium on new wind and solar.
Okay. Senator Scott?
On that one, what I'm going to suggest is that we look at that one and 228, the electric reliability one, the first one, and think about combining them and adding a paragraph to, during the moratorium, have the Public Service Commission take a hard look at the current technology on wind and solar and how far we can really go with it at this point, and just use the moratorium to buy enough time to get a good handle on that.
Okay.
So I think there's some virtue in that combination.
So I'll take that as your objection as well to tabling 0231.
Yeah.
Okay. How about Senator Landon?
Just for what it's worth, I'd probably land where the representative was on that one. I think that we can issue a directive to the Public Service Commission anytime we want to encourage any sort of review or look, regarding the moratorium. I honestly don't see that going anywhere. So I'd be for tabling.
Okay. How about 0230? Anyone dying to hear that one? No? Okay. How about 0232? Electricity rates for costs that do not benefit Wyoming.
I'd like to hear it.
You'd like to hear it?
And Mr. Chairman, I think that might be combinable with the other two we talked
Okay. With
about.
0228 and 0231?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then let's proceed this way. And I'm assuming everybody's okay with hearing the resolution. Yep. Okay. Getting some head nods. All right. So let's do this. Unless someone changes their mind, let's strike 0230, low carbon energy rate recovery from our agenda. And then, since 3 of them arguably can be combined, let's start with 0229. That's Senator Scott. And then we'll get the other 3 all in one swoop. So, Senator Scott, do you want LSO to at least walk through the mechanics of the bill, or are you going to do that? Okay, then the floor is yours. And okay. We are on LSO 0229, 24 LSO 0229.
Mr. Chairman, this,
Is your microphone on?
yeah, it is. This bill was taken out of last year's Senate File 42, the carbon capture bill, where it was put in because we heard persistent reports from reliable sources that there was a major problem at several of the coal-fired plants with reclamation, particularly relating to the, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, particularly relating to the disposal of the fly ash. And we figured we had to get that nailed down. It has, excuse me, has three purposes. One, last year was to clearly define what the problem was, because we figured nobody would be interested in putting carbon capture on a plant if they were at risk of getting stuck for big reclamation costs. That reason probably remains viable, especially considering what's happening to the price of oil, which drives the economics of carbon capture in this state, because that's where you'd use the CO2. Thank you. Second, we're quite concerned that if it isn't nailed down properly, the Wyoming ratepayers could get stuck with the full cost, including which was incurred to serve ratepayers in other states. We are concerned that that might go by the boards. And third, we're a little concerned we might wind up paying for the same reclamation twice, because we were hearing persistently that, oh, it was recovered in rates already, but there was never any real specifics on that, and we're trying to get specific, Mr. Chairman. So that's the background on the bill. Going through the bill, the section A says which ones it applies to. Coal-fired electric generation plants has a cutoff of July 1, 2034. We'll have to ask, is that a right date? I think it is. It does say that if you're converting it, if you look on page 2, lines 10 through 12, schedule for retirement, closure, or conversion to another fuel source, including natural gas or nuclear. And that's important in there, so you can't hide your fly ash problem by converting to some other source. And the provision is applies if you can't separate out the cost of decommissioning. You got to look at it for all the units in a particular facility. The provision is the PSC will take a look at how much was actually recovered for reclamation. Because we heard persistently that yes, it had been paid for, but there didn't seem to be any specifics. And this is where we're afraid we might wind up paying for something twice. So that provision starts bottom of page 3. Well, actually, it starts at the bottom of page 2. You have looking how much is liable for the other states. Provision for hiring outside consultants, prepare a report, and then after 90 days after the report is prepared, which gives time for the public to have a chance to look at it, then you hold a public hearing. So it's an informed public hearing where they look at, how adequately is the report. We think, Mr. Chairman, that DEQ has a handle on the current disposal practices, but item C on page 4, lines 8 to 15 is making sure that those costs are being covered. Then you have, as the bill is drafted, two alternatives. First one is page 4, line 7 to 22. It's the charges to make sure that if the ratepayers are going to have to pay, the Wyoming just pays its share and the other states pay theirs. We're only going to be on the hook for what we would owe based on where the power was used. The alternative language is found on page 5, lines 12 through 18. To the extent the rates didn't fully recover, we said the company's liable. And Mr. Chairman, had it drafted both ways, I think there's legal issues with item D on page 5, that alternative, and whether they're overwhelming or not, I don't know, but I wanted the committee to see both alternatives and consider both alternatives. Mr. Chairman, this is a general problem we have in many industrial facilities across the country, including some in this state. You see problems that were created back in the day when they simply didn't know any better and thought what they were doing was adequate. When it proves to be inadequate, who pays? And what we're hearing is that some of the early fly ash disposal at several of the large power plants that were slated for closure was simply putting them in unlined pits, and that has proved to be unsatisfactory. And that's one of the things we got to nail down.
Senator Scott, which of the two languages do you prefer?
I prefer the one on page 5 unless it won't work legally.
Okay.
And then I prefer the one on page 4.
All right.
That, to my mind, that's the issue, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
But it is, what's the fairest way to deal with that? Because I think at the time, a lot of the potential costs were incurred, presuming they're there. We simply did not, as a society, understand the risks and understand how to do it right, and we've progressed. And so who pays for the mistake that the earlier generation benefited from? And that's a general philosophic problem we've got, Mr. Chairman. It was certainly true in the leaking underground storage area, where what we did eventually was put a tax, an extra cent on the gasoline so we all pay for it, and then it gets used to mitigate the problems that nobody really can be held responsible for. The language on page 4 really follows that kind of precedent. This said the company should have been able to fix it and didn't. Let's stick it to the company. Section 2, starting on page 5, PSC in consultation with the Department of Environmental Quality, and this was what was worked out last year during session, was the way they would prefer to handle it. Do a study of these coal-fired generations, and if the reclamation has not been completed, they'll determine what's needed and what the costs will be. There is a hangover on page 3 and 4, the phrase "without material impeding the sale or conversion of the facility or unit." I would recommend deleting that and putting the period after met on line 3. That really is something that was more apropos to the carbon capture bill. The Public Service Commission will assess the cost of the public utility. That's page 6, line 6 through 9. They'll report to Joint Minerals and to this committee first, not later than September 24th, report and status update. And the update may include any request for additional appropriation to complete the study. The thought is you might get into this and find out, we really, to find out where the problem is, we might have to do particularly some drilling to sample groundwater and see if how far the contamination is spread, if it has spread. And if that isn't included in the initial appropriation, that's a possibility. We might have to do a little more. Final report due September 1 of 2025. And then there's on page 7, starting on line 2, there's an appropriation. And we'll need advice, Mr. Chairman, at our next meeting as to what that should be. So this gives some time. I know DEQ and PSC have thought about this some, but this gives some time saying, we want this study done. We want to know what we're up against. And these things do not get better with time, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott, did you have an appropriated value in the original bill?
No, we did not.
Okay.
We put it together, and at that point, the agencies involved didn't know. I think they probably have a better idea now. And by handling that this way at this meeting, I think there's a good chance we'll get a decent figure, subject to refinement during the session, but a decent figure for what it's likely to cost at the next meeting.
Okay.
But we didn't have time last year. Mr. Chairman, that's a very quick run through of the bill, and I'd be happy to answer any specific questions.
Questions for Senator Scott? All right. Thank you, Senator Scott.
Thank you.
I can't see who we have in the virtual world. Did Representative Ottman return? Yes. And she's the only one we have?
I'm here, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, there you are. Welcome, Senator Boner, and welcome back, Representative Harshman. I just wanted to make sure we had you all there.
Yeah, I'm listening intently. Thank you.
Good. All right. Public comment on 0229, 24 LSO 0229. Come on up, sir. And the commission. Why don't you just come? Well, you can still come fill the chair and do this. Be ready to roll. Chairman Throne, welcome back.
Thank you. And I have phone a friends in the audience if I need them.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Chairman Olson, Chairman Case, members of the committee. I wanted to just tell you where we are with decommissioning with the Public Service Commission. I sent you, it's a short order. Did not have a chance to sort of consolidate this into a fact sheet. I apologize for that. But with regard to Rocky Mountain Power's facilities, the decommissioning costs are in the depreciation rates. So I do agree with Senator Scott that you can't just go to a pot of money and say, It's there. But they are collected over time to cover the decommissioning costs. As part of the multi-state protocol process, the parties agreed in that document to additional decommissioning studies because there was concern, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Burbridge, that the whole costs of decommissioning were not known. So that was part of the 6-state agreement, which means every state pays its share of the costs of the decommissioning study. So get my dates right here by looking at the order, and the history set out in the order. So as part of the 2020 rate case, the decommissioning studies were included in the 2020 rate case, which was, the order was issued in that in early 2021. We elected to remove the decommissioning studies from that rate case and to treat them as a separately docketed matter to allow more review. And that was at Commissioner Robinson's suggestion, and Oregon had done something similar. So we created a separate docket to review the decommissioning study, and there was no objection. We didn't have a contested case in the decommissioning docket because there were no parties that requested a hearing. So the important part of the decommissioning process is that the 2018 study, which informed the 2018 decommissioning case, was, I apologize, I'm going to use an acronym here. I'll find out how it's the Association for the Advancement of Cost Engineering, or an AACE cost estimate. So the 2018 depreciation docket was based on a class 5 estimate. And that has an expected accuracy of -50% to +100%. So it was, not as robust as the next one. So in response to the 2020 multi-state protocol, they did another study. This is a Kiewit study, and it was an AACE Class 3 decommissioning cost estimate. And it was based on, and this is paragraph 5 of the order, fourth quarter 2019 orders. It included Jim Bridger, Dave Johnston, Hunter, Huntington, Naughton, Wyandotte, Hayden, and Colstrip units 3 and 4. And the scope of the work is described there. And the company states that the class 3 estimate has an expected accuracy of -20% to +30% and defines 10 to 40% of the project scope. So again, we actually took 2 bites of the apple at this. We had it on an open meeting agenda and then decided to delay it, which is why the order came out after your last legislative session. And we approved it. And what we learned was that the studies are valid, most valid, the closer you are to the retirement date. And maybe Mr. Ornelas remembers this better than I do. The next depreciation study and docket, I believe, is going to be 2024 or perhaps 2025. So they come in periodically to do these for Rocky Mountain Power. I'd have to do research on Black Hills. I think it's also worth pointing out that there are a number of coal-fired power plants in Wyoming that are not under our jurisdiction. So this only applies to the coal-fired power plants that are owned by regulated utilities. So Laramie River, Dry Fork, one of the Wygens, those are not owned by a regulated public utility, subject to our jurisdiction. So you're only looking at a subset. here. So if you do go forward with the bill, I would suggest, sorry, Senator Scott, not the language you would prefer, but the language on page 4. I think perhaps one of the unintended consequences of your suggestion on page 5 would be maybe to encourage the accelerated retirement of these facilities before new environmental laws come into effect that could make them more expensive. But that's just a theory on my part, but it's a thought I had when I read that. I would also suggest that you do not include any process in this. So I'm looking at page 4, lines 2 to 6, and lines 8 to 15. We have process. We have process that provides for public comment, and we already have authority to ask utilities for information on any subject. So I don't want to somehow weaken that by suggesting we need authority here to ask utilities for any information. I was looking, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
Senator Scott, on page 4, I was looking at basically lines 1 through 15. I don't believe we would need that. And then it seems likely that any costs associated with this effort would be passed on to the ratepayers. And I think if it's a Wyoming specific requirement, as a general rule, it's a Wyoming cost. So I think those are my comments at this point. Appreciate the opportunity.
Questions, committee? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just trying to catch up a little bit in my mind. I guess just a general question to the chairman. Does this bill do anything that we don't already have in motion? It feels like this allocation agreement has touched on several things the bill does. I'm just trying to get an understanding of, I think you said that it's not this liability, and the amount of that liability out across the state is not something we can just go to. It's not in your files. But is it out there in some manner that it doesn't take this, that we could gather up through various agreements? Or can you expound on that just a little bit further for me? Thank you.
Chairman Throne.
Thank you, Chairman Olson and Senator Landon. I always manage to leave out something when I don't have it all written down. So the end result of the decommissioning order, I left out the punchline, was that so there is an incremental cost that resulted from this decommissioning order that is accounted for separately, because that was an incremental cost beyond what was already being collected in rates. What is hard to explain and hard to identify, in my opinion, is where the rest of the money is, what's collected in the depreciation rates. They are on the hook for that. They will have to pay for decommissioning. And if they don't have the money where they can get it, then it's not going to fall back on the ratepayers, in my opinion. It would fall on the shareholders, because they've been collecting that money over time to pay for decommissioning. If you'll recall, way back when, I think it was 2011, maybe, when we revisited the industrial siting requirements for wind, the conclusion then was that if for a wind facility, that was built by a regulated utility, it did not have to be bonded because it was a regulated utility and it was collected in rates. So that has been the position of the legislature in the past as it applies to wind. You know, I don't believe DEQ has done a comprehensive review of what would be required. So that's a piece that we don't have. We don't do environmental regulations. We don't impose environmental obligations. We just look at the costs of what the utility has to do to comply with all of them.
Senator Scott? Microphone, Senator.
The bill says we're going to try to define what has already been recovered. And it seems to me if we can't define that, we're at very real risk of saying we need a further recovery to meet XX and X costs we hadn't anticipated, but we've no way to know how much they've recovered and how much they haven't, and we're likely to wind up paying twice for it. Do I hear you disagreeing with that, or do you see a need for finding out how much really has been paid already?
Chairman Throne?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Scott. It would be more, I believe, an accounting exercise. So I believe I asked them the question. That's okay. When they presented on the decommissioning study. And it's not as if there's a FERC account out there under the Uniform System of Accounting that says this is for decommissioning. But the decommissioning case looked at how much was available and then assessed an incremental amount on top of what was already being collected in rates to deal with the increased costs that the Kiewit study found. And then the next depreciation case, and I might have to get back to you with the specific year, unless one of the people behind me is shouting out a number. You know, we'll go through the exercise again. I think the next depreciation case is 2024. But there are no retirements planned in Wyoming before 27, I believe, is the plan now. And they would still have to come to us for approval. And I don't believe anybody from Rocky Mountain Power is here this afternoon.
No, they're.
Are they there?
Yep.
Okay, then I will let them answer those questions.
Committee, additional questions for the Public Service Commission? No? All right, thank you, Chairman Throne. You're on deck.
Good afternoon, Chairman Olson, Chairman Case, members of the committee. My name is Anthony Ornelas. I'm the administrator of the Wyoming Office of Consumer Advocate. I'll be quite brief as most of my comments mimic Chairman Throne. I would just urge careful consideration and caution with this particular draft legislation. To Senator Landon's point, in my opinion, much of what's contained in this bill would be duplicative to many of the processes that we already have established for Pacific Corp and Rocky Mountain Power. As Chairman Throne indicated, we do a depreciation study for Rocky Mountain Power every 5 years, so it should be in the 2023 timeframe, the next cycle. We also, through the MSP process, have some additional reclamation or decommissioning study processes already in place in which we evaluate coal plants that are coming towards the end of their life. With that, I do not believe there's really a substantial risk to the Wyoming ratepayers of paying twice, as Senator Scott has alluded to. The company, Rocky Mountain Power, does keep accounting on each individual state and the overall decommissioning and depreciation costs that each state has contributed towards a specific facility or group of facilities that they have employed for the public service there. Lastly, these are expensive and expansive studies that these undergo. So certainly not opposed to the EPA's participation to the extent they can lend any expertise that may not be housed within the commission itself. However, these are undertaken by nationally renowned engineering firms, depending on the level, whether it's a class 5, a class 3, or I believe there's even a class 1. These are six-figure dollar type studies to get to that. So if we do Wyoming specific, there could be some costs that come to Wyoming ratepayers that may not otherwise be needed. And I would also caution you that so many of the inputs to these studies, they are stale almost the very day that the report is issued. If inflation changes, if the price of scrap steel changes, if we bolt on any new equipment between today and the date when it ultimately would retire, those new investments would not be captured in a prior study. So that's something we have to refresh quite frequently to stay on top of this, which is why we have the 5-year process. And so I would just urge caution in this, as I do think a lot of it is duplicative and could result in additional cost to Wyoming ratepayers that maybe would not lean to additional benefits. Thank you.
Any questions, committee? I appreciate your testimony. Thank you. Additional public testimony? Any in the virtual world? Any public comment? No? All right, I will close public comment. Committee, I'm guessing because we can clean up this bill a little bit now, but we don't have an appropriation. And we're probably not going to have that until next meeting. So I'd entertain a motion to advance this bill to the next session. So moved by Senator Scott. Seconded by Representative Wiley. Do you have an opinion, Senator Scott, on Chairman Throne's suggestion on page 4 to eliminate language?
Yes, I have an opinion. I think we ought to do it.
So that was page 4, lines 1 through 15, is that right?
Yeah.
So there's a motion to strike the language, and seconded by Senator Case. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That amendment carries.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
page 6, line 3, put a period after met, delete the last 2 words and delete line 4. That's a carryover from previous bill we don't need here.
Okay, page 6, line 3, period after met, remove the remaining language on lines 3 and 4. Okay, is there a second to that? Senator Case, second. Discussion? The discussion was that this was from the prior language,
Yeah,
consistent with
not
the prior
relevant.
version of the bill. All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That amendment carries. Senator Scott, what about subsection D on page 4?
Mr. Chairman, reluctantly, I would move that the final version include the page 4 language and not the page 5 language of the alternatives.
So you want to leave it alone?
I want to leave the language alone, but I want to adopt that option as opposed to the one saying the company's stuck with it. I think that's a better way to go. And we have it if we need to back up on that.
Okay. All right. Any other amendments to this bill? Any discussion on this?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Scott?
I think it is quite important that we do have an independent look at the accounting so that we know how much was set aside for rates. Otherwise, I think there's a real risk of paying for it twice.
Okay. Senator Landon?
Mr. Chairman, I'm certainly willing to push this forward. I'm going to be interested to see what the cost is going to be on this study. And then the second piece, I just wonder how many of these type plants we have outside the purview of Rocky Mountain Power, and whether or not the study's going to include that. I'm reading the bill that it would. And if it wouldn't, then why wouldn't it? If our idea with this bill is to take a look at all of the liability that we have out there, wouldn't we want to include facilities outside the major utility that we've talked about today? So I guess I could use a little clarification on that, but we can take this bill up later. Those are the questions in my mind today. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Scott?
I think as a practical matter, it's written generally, but it does not include those other facilities, because my understanding is if you look on page 2, line 12, that January 1st, 2034 date, I think they're all planned for retirement after that date. And this one is saying we're really interested in the ones that are close to retirement, because that's the ones we're likely to have to pay for and get good numbers on at this point. So that's why they're not covered. And it has to do with how quickly the retirement date is going to be upon us.
Welcome back, Representative Haroldson. Thank you. We are on 24 LSO 0229. And it's been, we have not. We're on our first draft. Yep. We struck 24 LSO 0230 from the agenda. We decided not to hear that one. And we're going to hear the remaining three together. We're on 0229. The motion is to move it forward to the next meeting. Is there any additional discussion on this bill?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, if the Public Service Commission thinks that we can rely on their existing processes, studies, I would think it'd be welcome if you could provide us with a specific amendment next meeting to do that, so that with regard to the study as to how much is needed, we could stick with that existing process if you think it's adequate, Mr. Chairman. So I would invite them to do that.
Okay, I'm getting a head nod from the chairman. Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion does carry. All right. Add that to the agenda for next meeting. So let's do this with LSO. What I think we'll do is, I like the idea of just introducing all three of these bills, and then we'll take any comment on any one of them or all of them.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Josh Anderson, LSO. So these three bills will be 24 LSO 228, 24 LSO 231, and 24 LSO 232. These were all requested at our last meeting up in Douglas on August 25th. So the first one, Mr. Chairman, 24 LSO 228. This is a request related to electricity reliability and enforcement of those reliability requirements. So the bill on page 2, Mr. Chairman, goes into the chapter on reliable and dispatchable low carbon energy, and Currently, there's a requirement for the Public Service Commission to establish baseline standards for electricity reliability. This would amend that language to say that they would establish baseline standards for electricity reliability in Wyoming, and the standards established may include limits on outages and shall ensure new or expanded intermittent generation do not unreasonably diminish power quality or increase momentary outages across utility service territory. Then it would add a new language on the bottom or on page 3 to the end of subparagraph C, just stating that if a utility fails to meet the reliability standards established under subparagraph A, that would be subject to the penalty provisions of the chapter in 17 or in 1712-201, and that an action to recover for loss could be brought under 3712-208. So that's that bill, Mr. Chairman. I take any questions on that or go on to the next one.
Committee, before we jump to the next bill, any questions on this one? No? All right, take us through 0231.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, this was the request to establish a 1-year moratorium on wind and solar. So this will add a new section to chapter 3 on rates. And on page 2 is the language. It would just say, notwithstanding any other provision of the chapter, the rates charged by an electric utility shall not include any recovery of or earnings on the capital costs associated with wind or solar power generation facilities built on or after July 1, 2024. And then the request was also to have that be a 1-year moratorium. So it would include a repealer there that it would repeal on July 1 of 2025.
Committee, any questions on 0231? Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, not a question, but a comment. Mr. Chairman, it seems to me that if we combine this with the 228 draft, then we have the moratorium, and the question is, what's the purpose of the moratorium? And what I would suggest is adding a paragraph that tells the Public Service Commission to hold a public inquiry and get comments from the public and the utilities on how much of these renewables is safe in our current system and how much would cause violation of their reliability standards, and what the current technology is on storing electricity, how reliable that is and how costly it is. And that would give them time to then refine that reliability standard and have a standard for saying, we'll accept this amount more and no more kind of thing, Mr. Chairman.
All right. We can definitely, once we get to that point, we can decide whether we combine all 3 of these bills or not.
So, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Representative Newsom, okay, co-chairman Case.
Mr. Chairman, I hope we don't spend a lot of time on this bill. It's not going to be able to hunt, basically. It's not a very workable bill, and I think there was a messaging aspect of this, but I would just hope we wouldn't combine it with the others. I'm not sure I see a lot of benefit to it.
That's what you were gonna say, Representative Newsom, isn't it? All right. Very good. Let's look at our last one, 0232.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the final bill here, this was a request to, again, at that last meeting, to establish principles for excluding certain costs from Wyoming's share of the multi-state protocol. So again, this bill also adds a new section to chapter 3. Just says, in determining rates under this chapter for an interstate electric public utility where a portion of system costs are apportioned to Wyoming ratepayers. The Public Service Commission shall exclude any system costs from rate determinations that do not have a benefit to ratepayers in Wyoming. And then it says costs may be excluded. Costs that may be excluded include capital costs associated with facilities that are built specifically to meet electricity service requirements established by other states or entities outside of Wyoming. And then it says the Public Service Commission may approve a reduced apportionment of costs to the extent that system costs are used to serve Wyoming ratepayers, but which relate to facilities were built at a higher cost than potential alternative sources of electricity as determined by the commission, because those alternative sources may not have met electricity service requirements established by other states outside of Wyoming. And that's that bill, Mr. Chairman. Take any questions.
Questions on this bill for Mr. Anderson? All right. Thank you for running through those bills with us. We'll now take public comment on any one or all of these bills. Well, let's start with our Public Service Commission, actually, sorry. Welcome back, Chairman Throne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was barely settled in my seat. I believe it's to, sorry. I think I'd like to focus my comments on 232 initially, and then Deputy Chairman Petrie is going to give you an update on some reliability issues with some information that we didn't have with us in Douglas. I've given you a short fact sheet on the multi-state protocol process. It was emailed this morning. Apologize for the timing. So I'm just going to run through that, and feel free to interrupt with any questions. So the 2020 protocol was approved by commission order on November 30th, 2020, and it will expire at the end of this year, 2023, without approval of the pending 2-year extension, which the parties to the protocol have, which is a multi-stakeholder process, including the industrials, the company, representatives of our staff, the OCA. They have proposed a 2-year extension, and that is filed with us and does not have any, we won't be having a contested case hearing on that. There's been no objection to extending the 2020 protocol, but we haven't scheduled that yet. Just want to talk a little bit about the effect of the MSP, as we call it, on PSC authority. It's pretty clear in the introduction to the multi-state protocol, and I've just quoted it here on the fact page. Nothing in the 2020 protocol is intended to abrogate any commission's right or obligation to determine fair, just, and reasonable rates upon applicable laws and the record established in rate proceedings conducted by that commission. And I won't read the rest of that. So it's our opinion that the multi-state protocol does not limit our authority in any rate case to make adjustments that are in the public interest of Wyoming. The primary purpose of the multi-state protocol is a cost allocation tool that has the effect of streamlining interjurisdictional cost allocation and thus reducing the cost of the rate-making process. Without it, if we didn't have the protocol, we would still have to allocate the costs. It would just be a line-by-line exercise in looking at the company's expenses. Whereas for the less controversial ones, it's sort of preordained and there's not a lot of debate, I think would be the fair way to put it. And I think as Mr. Acey explained to you this morning, any multi-state utility, we have to go through a cost allocation exercise. It's just with Rocky Mountain Power, we have this more formal document. The current 2020 protocol has pretty concrete financial benefit to Wyoming. So it basically provided that the company agrees to include a $5 million adjustment annually to net power costs in Wyoming customer rates beginning January 1st, 2021 until December 31st, 2022, and $7.175 million adjustment annually to reduce net power costs in Wyoming customer rates from January 1st, 2023 until December 31st, 2029. So that was a benefit that the Wyoming representatives were able to negotiate on behalf of Wyoming. I believe it was a qualified facilities adjustment. So that's where that money came from. And that was a benefit, a pretty clear benefit in the 2020 protocol. Discussed the decommissioning issue in the last matter. It was out of the 2020 protocol that we were able to get the agreement to require the more robust Kiewit study to update decommissioning costs. The current 2020 protocol also has a flexible cost allocation process. It's gradually moved from a static, i.e. hard percentage number, to a dynamic allocation to as states policies change to move toward decarbonized electricity. So it allows the PSC to adjust allocation for specific assets according to the use by each state in the protocol. Finally, if we were not to approve the current protocol, or if the law changed in some fashion to affect the protocol, the parties would basically go back to the table and decide and renegotiate. So whether your proposed legislation might trigger everybody going back to the table, I don't know. But my basic view of the proposed legislation is that the introduction essentially gives us the authority to do what the legislation proposes. And so those are my comments on the MSP.
Senator Scott.
She lost me on the curve. You said introduction?
Oh,
I didn't understand what you were talking about.
Chairman Throne.
thank you, Chairman Olson. Senator Scott, part of the agreement, it's in the introduction section. It's on page 3 of the multi-state protocol. It explicitly reserves our authority. So it's in the introduction to the agreement that we've approved. It's binding on all the parties to the agreement.
Okay, and you're saying it does what? I'm confused.
I'll just read it if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Nothing in the 2020 protocol is intended to abrogate any commission's right or obligation to, 1, determine fair, just, and reasonable rates based upon applicable laws and the record established in rate proceedings conducted by that commission.
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, trying to tread very carefully here. I understand that that's in the front of the multi-state protocol. And I also understand there's a statutory and a legal precedent about, stuff being used and useful, of course, we all know that. But a couple of questions, I guess. Is there any harm by putting this in statute that mimics those requirements that if, and the second question is related, but it sounds different, is in regards to earlier proceedings of the commission and assets that are relating to the multi-state protocol of earlier versions, has the commission ever declined to approve any of those assets?
Chairman Throne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Case. We would have to research that. But I will say that in the last rate case, it wasn't an asset issue, but it was an allocation issue related to the energy imbalance proceeds. We did not agree with the company's application of the multi-state protocol to that issue. And we went with what we thought made more sense. And, that led to a little additional money for Wyoming. I'd have to look up. But, it's not as if in the last rate case, which is, all I can talk about, we just said, oh, the multi-state protocol says X, so we're going to go with X. We looked at that very closely, and we disagreed with the company's interpretation on that one issue.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Is there any harm in restating in statute what the principles are?
Chairman Throne.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, maybe to we don't know.
Thank you. And maybe thinking about that, maybe we should hold this till the next meeting, take testimony today, of course, but think more about that. If there's any harm, we don't want to do any harm, but thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It kind of cuts both ways then, right? If there's no harm in passing it because it's duplicative of the existing authority that the commission has, then there's no necessity in passing it either.
Well, I didn't say that, Mr. Chairman. I think there is a reason to have an explicit statement of the legislature regarding these things. We didn't sign the multi-state protocol. We might disagree with things that come out of it. This gives a standard that we have. As long as it agrees with what they're doing, that's great. Otherwise, this could be binding in the future.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
Chairman Throne.
not to put other people in the room on the spot, but I would just suggest that there are others in the room who could also answer that question and might have opinions.
All right. We'll definitely hopefully get to those. So that was 0232. Do you have anything on the other two?
I would, Mr. Chairman, turn it over to Deputy Chair Petrie to just update you on some reliability issues.
Okay. Commissioner Petrie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Regarding 0228, the reliability standards provisions proposed here, we discussed this in Douglas recently, and I'm not sure that we quite gave you the correct facts there. The correct, or the rest of the story is that while the commission has not had a proceeding to establish baseline reliability standards for either of the two utilities that these provisions apply to, we have received 2 filings from Rocky Mountain Power and 2 filings from Black Hills Power and Cheyenne Light Fuel and Power. One of those was a combined filing, and in the subsequent year, I believe they each filed their own separate filing that includes the data that the companies have determined presents the state of their service reliability and quality. As I said, We have not yet had a proceeding to examine that or take any action to establish the standards that those companies have proposed or some other more stringent standards. But the data is in the hands of the commission, and I believe we have what we need to proceed with some kind of a public proceeding where we could establish the baseline standards as the statutes directed and as our rules to implement those statutes required of those filings. So we've got 2 years of data from the 3 companies that are involved here. On page 3 of this draft bill, beginning with the well, it's mainly the whole page 3. There are reference to a couple of penalty provisions. The first is 37-12-201 in line 5, and that is a misdemeanor violation provision that's probably been in statutes for many years, and that provides for a fine of up to $1,000. I believe it's per instance, and that would be a process that would, I believe, require the commission to refer that to some county prosecuting authority, whether it's the county attorney or the district attorney, to bring those actions. So that wouldn't be something that the commission could conduct on its own through a process that we would manage. And then the other provision in line 9, 37-12-208, that's a provision that makes the utility liable for damages that it causes by violation of statutes and orders, I believe. And that is that requires district court action to be brought by some damaged party. So based on our previous discussion, we weren't sure whether that was really what the committee had in mind, or whether it was, $1,000 fine for a misdemeanor that depends on referral to a prosecuting authority, or a district court action to be brought by somebody who suffered damages due to the failure. And so just so it's clear that that's what these damage or penalty provisions would provide. And I think we had discussed something potentially different where it would be the commission imposing some kind of a penalty.
Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, microphone. This is your finger.
You're so close. I got it.
I'm gonna bring you a hammer one. Mr. Chairman, that last sentence there on page 3, starting on line 5, you're essentially, am I reading that is that we're saying to the utility, we're going to make you liable by turning the plaintiff's attorneys loose on you if you have outages? Is that one likely to get us into real trouble? We have some kind of an outage, and the next thing we know that there's large-scale hunting for contingency fees that ratepayers wind up paying for. Is that what's going on here?
Commissioner Petrie?
Mr. Chairman, I suppose that is a potential result of a provision like that. I actually had thought myself that it might be a provision that put too large a barrier, or a barrier that was larger than you intended, in the way of customers that might be harmed by poor reliability or declining reliability and power quality issues. So certainly if it could become a plaintiff's attorney playground, I suppose. I was more pointing to the aspect of that it would require affirmative action by damaged customers rather than any kind of an action by the commission.
All right, any other questions, committee, for the commission?
Mr. Chairman,
Oh, welcome, Senator Boner. Please, go ahead.
okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, I was glad to hear that the commission seems to be moving forward with kind of further defining this current law, which does establish a reliability standard. So I'm wondering if they could just give a little bit more detail on that, on their efforts there, and what the timeline may be to go ahead and proceed with what was my intent the whole time, was to have some discussion as to what the proper energy mix is on our grid to ensure reliability for our citizens. So just a little bit more information about that would be helpful for me.
Commissioner Petrie?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just to generally describe the information that was provided in these, in the reports filed by the two subject companies, this appears to be a fairly comprehensive description through a presentation of the data that the companies have gathered that represents a level of reliability and service quality that is current and going back into the previous year. Now, this won't be perhaps universally accepted by customers, but my impression is that the service quality as of now and in the last year is within reasonable industry standards, that we haven't had rolling blackouts or brownouts or outages that are particularly related to any kind of intermittent or renewable energy generation. So that's up to now. And as I recall our consideration of this in the rulemaking proceedings, we understood the statute to mean that we are to establish a baseline standard that I understood would be based on our recent acceptable experience in service quality and reliability, and that our charge would be to prevent that from diminishing or deteriorating as additional renewable intermittent resources are brought onto the system. And so I believe that we have at least a very good start on having before the commission the data that would be necessary to give a solid technical description of the reliability and service quality that we are accustomed to and that we intend to see preserved, and not to have that be diminished by changes to the system. Oh, and Mr. Chairman, I'll
Yes.
finish up with what I envision the commission doing, and this is something that we would get into more detail in a public open meeting on. But what we would generally do here, whenever the commission is going to make a decision that affects anybody's rights or obligations, is that we would conduct a public proceeding. And so we would in some form of proceeding or other, whether it's an investigation or some other format, we would provide a public notice, an opportunity for interested parties to participate, and we would go through some contested case proceeding, and then we would make a determination that would specify what the baseline standards are so that everybody would understand what may not be diminished or degraded.
Senator Boner, do you have any follow-up?
No, Mr. Chairman, I think that makes sense. And, if we need additional, I guess, proactive measures, perhaps this process that they're going through now could be incorporated into an additional bill draft that would have a more robust process with the IRP. So, yeah, I appreciate the commission's work on this, and I look forward to seeing how it develops.
Representative Ottman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate Senator Boner's comments, as he's a lot more familiar with a lot of this energy. And thank you, Commissioner Petrie. I have a couple questions, and please be patient. I just want to really understand all this. Today, we've been talking a lot about Rocky Mountain Power and, whether or not we're responsible for decisions that are made with that company according to state laws in other places, and green energy, and how the robust actions of some legislatures are trickling down here possibly. And so that's kind of where I'm looking. First off, I was wondering, sometimes rules and policies and legislation, we have law, but we don't have any consequences if that's broken. So I'm thinking that is along the lines of what 3712-201 and 3712-208 are going to do. But then what I was wondering was that on page 2, when we're talking about the energy generation portfolio, we're saying that the commission shall establish by rule energy portfolio standards, which is good, that will maximize the use of dispatchable and reliable low carbon electricity. Is that to maximize the production, or is that to maximize what can be allowable in the state? I wasn't quite understanding that. We're not saying we need to have a certain percentage of renewables in the state, are we? By a certain time or date or decision? Thank you.
Commissioner Petrie?
Mr. Chairman, this is a provision that 3718-102, the energy portfolio standards. This is, as it states there in line 8 and 9, this is a standard that's meant to maximize the use of dispatchable, reliable, low carbon electricity, which is elsewhere defined in the statutes as carbon capture equipment installed on coal-fired power plants. And so this is not an energy portfolio standard that requires a particular percentage of any type. It directed the commission to explore the potential for carbon capture to be installed on existing plants. And the commission has focused on that. There was a very involved rulemaking proceeding, and there have been subsequently filings and extensive proceedings at the commission to examine the prospects of both of the public utilities in the state who this statute applies to. And that is an ongoing process where we will have continued filings. There has not been a percentage standard established yet. And I think it's a simple matter of We just haven't been able to get there yet. This is not a simple task for the utilities or the commission. And we are continuing to explore that potential as the statute's directed.
Follow-up, Representative Ottman?
I'm just going to have to think about all that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you. Additional questions? Do you have any comments on 0231?
We don't have any comments on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your comments and your time. Additional public testimony. Go ahead and, you can just go ahead and fill the chairs actually, so you're ready to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Abby Briggerman on behalf of the Wyoming Industrial Energy Consumers, or WIAC. I'm here to offer WIAC's position on the three bills that are presently being discussed. I will, if it's all right, take them a little out of order of number.
Yep, whatever your pleasure is.
Thank you. On draft bill 0231, which is the moratorium on new wind and solar, WIAC respectfully opposes this bill. WIAC believes that Rocky Mountain Power should be required to have a least cost, least risk resource plan, regardless of the source of the electricity. In many instances, including the current rate case, renewable sources of energy have placed downward pressure on Rocky Mountain Power's overall net power costs, which Mr. Hogan discussed earlier this morning. And so by eliminating this potential source of generation for a period of time even, the legislation will have an unintended consequence of increasing net power costs and ratepayer rates. So for that reason, we are opposing this piece of legislation. On draft bill 0232, which is directed at the MSP, WIAC again respectfully opposes this legislation. Because this draft legislation would undermine the MSP and likely cause similar responses from other states, this would ultimately harm Wyoming ratepayers, and then therefore WIAC opposes it. Wyoming ratepayers do benefit from the MSP because it allows Rocky Mountain Power to plan generation and infrastructure in the most efficient manner and have every state pay their portion. Yes, Wyoming does pay for some infrastructure that helps other states, but other states pay for the infrastructure that benefits Wyoming. Having this sharing process helps the system be more efficient and helps Wyoming ratepayers. Again, pulling out of it would likely increase rates for Wyoming ratepayers. And finally, draft bill, let me make sure I get the number right, 0228 regarding reliability. WIAC respectfully opposes this legislation as written. The legislation as drafted raises a few concerns. Many large customers are served under electric service agreements that limit Rocky Mountain Power's liability. And so it's unclear whether this legislation would move that accountability needle for Rocky Mountain Power in any way for these particular ratepayers. The legislation, it doesn't appear that the legislation would prevent Rocky Mountain Power from recovering any penalties or damages imposed on it in rates from ratepayers. And so it would appear that the legislation would create additional penalty and damages provisions for Rocky Mountain Power, which Rocky Mountain Power would ultimately be able to turn around and recover from ratepayers and rates. That's very concerning to ratepayers. And lastly, the legislation does not require the commission, the Public Service Commission, from imposing any outages standards. It's permissive, and so it may lack the teeth that the committee wants it to have. So again, WIAC opposes this legislation as written. And that concludes our position on these three bills. I do have to leave, but with apologies, at 3:30 today, and so if I can answer any outstanding questions, I'm happy to do it at this time. Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Briggerman? Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, the presentation we had from Rocky Mountain Power this morning said that they were benefiting from the zero fuel costs on the renewables. That was holding the rates down, but it didn't give any of the costs that they were incurring, including capital, transmission cost, maintenance on those facilities. You said that you thought they were benefiting from the downward pressure caused by renewables. Have you done any analysis of what their other costs are to know that there's a net benefit in there?
Ms. Briggerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Scott,
Is your microphone on?
it is on, but
Maybe
I
you
will.
just have to scoot
yes,
it closer to
yeah.
you.
There we go. In this particular rate case, the Mr. Hogamine accurately discussed that 97% of costs are associated with net power costs and not capital cost additions. That is because there is in what we call the test period for rates, there is only the Gateway South transmission project, which is the bulk of future capital costs. There's only 1 month of that project being in service during the test period for this rate case. And so we would expect in a future rate case that a lot of the upward pressure in rates in a future rate case would be due to capital costs, but that's for another time. In this particular rate case, it is power costs, fuel costs, and because wind and solar do not have any fuel costs, those facilities have been tempering net power costs in this particular rate case.
Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, I am concerned that we're systematically looking at the benefits of the renewables and not their full costs that we're incurring. And I was hoping they had done some analysis of that, but it sounds like not.
Additional questions for Ms. Briggerman? All right, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Gary Hogamine, Rocky Mountain Power. I'd like to make comments on all three bills. I'll make my comments, and if Mr. Garlish has any comments, perhaps we can turn over to him if that is okay with you. So maybe starting with 0228, this bill requires what I'll basically say reliability standards. My understanding of the bill is that the concern is around generation impacts, and specifically intermittent renewable generation and those impacts on the reliability of our system. I understand the concern. My concern is that I think we're conflating reliability, which is at the end use customer, with generation, transmission, and distribution. The vast majority, and I would say, subject to check within the last 5+ years, and probably much longer than that, 100% of the outages have nothing to do with generation, which is, I think, exactly what this is trying to target. But it has everything to do with things like birds flying into lines, squirrels in transformers, and so forth. So I believe we're taking aim at perhaps an understandable concern around intermittent generation, but the effect of what we're doing here is really to penalize ourselves and others in the utility space for what are kind of normal run-of-the-course transmission distribution outages, which we absolutely work very hard to prevent. I might add, we don't want to have them either. I think also a possible unintended consequence would be, for example, if we are required to pay, let's say, $1,000, it was mentioned earlier, for an outage, I think you would be incentivizing people to cause the reliability issues themselves on our facilities, for example, shooting at transformers, et cetera. So I'm worried about unintended consequences as well. Final comment on 228 is that if it is generation and intermittent resources that you're worried about, that is exactly what is done at the federal level. There is an organization called the National Energy Electricity Reliability Council, or NERC, NERC, that has as their exact reason for being is to make sure that all utilities have an adequate and reliable source of power. And if they cause, brownouts and blackouts, they are shown to, they are made to show what happened and can be subject to very significant penalties. So I think it is something that happens already at the federal level. So that's a 0228. My comments on 0231, this is, again, in my summary, a bill limiting the recovery of costs for wind and solar power after a specified date. Again, I agree with Ms. Briggerman, Wyack. This is essentially limiting the lowest cost, least risk resources that we identify, that the commission then approves and agrees with. And then essentially this law would come over top of it and say, no, that's not what's best for customers, when in fact it would be the lowest cost. So it would result in higher costs for our customers. And so therefore I don't think it is wise. Last comment on then 0232, a bill, again, kind of reading it, specifying that costs of interstate electric public utilities do not benefit Wyoming ratepayers and may be excluded from cost apportioned to Wyoming. I agree with Ms. Briggerman. I think this handcuffs the MSP participants. There is, Chairman Case, you asked, why not do this? What's possible harm? My paraphrase of your question. I think the possible harm might be, and you would know, it being involved in the MSP process, you have this ability now to horse trade, to negotiate between different states, and perhaps this might limit the ability of Wyoming representatives to be able to get something that's good for Wyoming by agreeing to potentially pay something that this bill might preclude. I think an unintended consequence, again, that would ultimately hamstring the negotiations at MSP. So I would suggest that it's probably, certainly as worded now, not in the best interest. With that, I'll stop, maybe answer any questions if there might be any.
Committee? Not seeing any. Is this about hamsters or
Hamstring.
or hamstrings? There you go. Representative Knapp.
I'm curious as to why, and I know the industry has gone this way, but I'm from Campbell County, which we've been in the coal markets forever, and everything used to be long-term contracts, which guaranteed your prices. Why has the industry gone so much into open market? Because as I'm hearing, this particular rate case is highly influenced by that open market price. But isn't it kind of a catch-22 as you drift more towards a product that may not be as reliable and get rid of long-term contracts? You are subject to the open market. And again, that's turning around and costing the taxpayer or the citizen. So do you just have a comment on that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Knapp, it's great, and also, again, insightful question. By and large, we don't go with longer contracts than what we do is because our public service commissions don't want us to. That isn't necessarily true here in Wyoming, although I can't recite off the top of my head what the last instructions were from the commission. But I do know that in our other 6 states, they want us to limit the length of those contracts. And in some regards, it's an opinion by the commissions on what's more valuable and more risky. If you think that costs are going down in the future, you would want, and you'd incentivize the utility to have short-term contracts, because then you can access the falling market. You set up a very long-term, contract, you're not going to be able to do that. Hedging, for example, that is one thing that Ms. Briggerman at Wyack mentioned earlier. We have very restrictive, in some states, hedging policies and requirements that given to us by the Public Service Commission. They don't want us going out and buying gas for 5 or 10 years, again, because that has in the past resulted in higher costs than what you would get on the marketplace. So the quick answer is there are a variety of instructions and requirements from the Public Service Commissions that we have to obey that don't allow the longer contracts.
Any additional testimony on these bills?
Not for me, Mr. Garlish, no. Nope, I think we're good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both.
Thank you.
I heard a.
Oh, I guess we have Representative Ottman may have a question for you. Go ahead, Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question. I'm kind of wondering, I'm not up on commodities and open market and all that very good. I'm learning a lot. But what I was wondering is it lawful? So does it happen or could it happen that Pacific Corp possibly has interest in some of the fuel sources through ownership or I'm not really sure how they would do that, but is that a possibility so that, you know, regulating that market and doing things, purchasing not shorter contracts, can that go on? Thank you.
Struggling.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, we own a coal mine associated with the Jim Bridger mine, the Jim Bridger power plant. So we do have, we own that fuel. That is handled very specifically and separately than all our other fuel costs and very highly regulated. We show all our books essentially again on what our costs are. It's cost-based. It's not something that we can access and charge ourselves more money and recover. It's all cost-based and regulated as well. Everything else in our portfolio comes from third-party fuel vendors.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
follow up. Is that the procedure and rule across all 6 states and all 6 subsidiaries? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Representative, yes, that is for all 6 states. The same.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This time for real.
Mr. Chairman.
Welcome.
Hi. Chairman Olson, Chairman Case, members of the committee. My name is Chris Mickey. I'm here with the Wyoming Business Alliance. And I just wanted to offer a little bit of general comments to the committee that kind of encapsulates the bills that were discussed and are being discussed, and then the rest of the conversation that we've had so far today, which has been excellent. The WBA's guiding principles state that we support public policy and legislation that enhance a sound business environment and to reduce regulatory barriers that burden Wyoming businesses. 98% of businesses in Wyoming are small businesses, and these businesses need a stable regulatory environment and certainty when it comes to costs in order for the businesses to succeed and to grow. Affordable, reliable, and predictable energy costs are essential to running a successful business and for the retention and recruitment of their employees. Expensive power costs are job killers for Wyoming. Wyoming has been blessed as an all of the above energy state, and it's important to ensure that we aren't picking winners and losers, but rather utilizing every bit of energy that we can get in order to keep these energy costs down. We're grateful for the committee's willingness to undertake this very real and important topic, and we are concerned that the proposed rate increases, such as the one that we have been discussing today, is happening on a faster timeline than this body can address in the short term, which of course we've discussed a little bit earlier. Wyoming has great processes in place along with industry and economic experts to address these issues, such as Chairman Throne and the rest of the PSC have been doing a great job. And we're seeing those processes at work currently. And we're concerned that if these processes are tinkered with a little bit too much or too incorrectly, there will be unintended consequences that have the potential to further burden small businesses and the citizens of Wyoming. Because utilities are fundamental for the growth and prosperity in business, we want to ensure that Wyoming businesses have the best opportunity to succeed and to grow in Wyoming. So with that, I'll take any questions if the committee has them.
Questions, committee? All right, thank you, Chris. Mr. Bush.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Bush here with Black Hills Energy, and also, as you've heard, Cheyenne Light Fuel and Power, which is our subsidiary that does electricity here in Cheyenne. As I've said previously, we serve electric to Cheyenne and a little piece of Northeast Wyoming. That's through Black Hills Power, which is our South Dakota-based utility. Cheyenne Light Fuel and Power is our Wyoming-based utility here in Cheyenne. So I'm going to comment on all three of these, I guess. A lot of which has been said. Mr. Hogeveen went over 228 with the reliability and covered a lot of the things that I was going to cover about the federal involvement and that sort of thing. But I also wanted to point out and sort of reiterate, I think that outages are expensive for us, for any utility. That's not something that we can just kind of laugh off or not care about. I mean, reliability is cornerstone of our business, and our ability to deliver reliable power is critical. There's all sorts of factors that come into that with, as was mentioned, animals. We lost one of our local raccoons. I think that might have been the reason for the outage in the Capitol last year, if I remember right. So there's a lot of factors there. Drunk drivers hitting poles, contractors hitting lines, things like that are generally the causes of outages more than generation, unless you're in Texas, and we are not. We have done a very good job with our systems in ensuring that we have the power there. It's generally weather related or animal related that really gets into the reliability piece. But then again, that's all expensive. That impacts our ability to sell power, which of course costs us money. We're sending crews out, usually in terrible weather late at night, and they go out and do very hard work in those conditions. That's expensive, and we don't like to do that kind of stuff. So again, I think the PSC does a lot of this already. The feds already do a lot of this. I'm not sure 228 really does a lot to address any of those situations. If we want to really get into it, burying lines would be the best way to go, but that's really, really, really expensive. And the gentleman to my left would probably have something to say about that if we decided to start just burying lines, because it is very expensive. So moving on to 231, the moratorium. I think a big part of this for us and the way we look at it is this is economic development. Certainly here in Cheyenne, our primary service territory, there's been a lot of economic development. There's been a lot of growth here. And the data centers in particular have come and brought a lot to the county and to the city, not only in the form of taxes, but also employment and good employment, high wages, things like that. And they're spending a lot of money here. And quite frankly, they have ESG, however you want to clarify that or quantify that. They want renewables. And in this business, a lot of times we're selling people the wickets that they want. So a moratorium does not help. A moratorium really hurts our ability to continue to see the growth that we have here in Southeast Wyoming, and particularly in Cheyenne. So with that, on to 232. So we are not part of a multi-state protocol. We're organized probably closer to what you heard from Mr. Acey with MDU. We have generation and other assets in South Dakota, but we also have our generation in Campbell County that also feeds our customers in South Dakota. So there is some cross-state, but the only real cross-state that we don't have is with Colorado. We have electricity service down around Pueblo, and they're basically islanded on their own, separate from a lot of our other operations because of various factors. But really, again, this is something that the Public Service Commission already looks at, already has a say in how costs are allocated and whether they're prudent. And I think it, again, would not be something that's necessary. So with that, I don't want to repeat everything that's been said, but I appreciate the bind that the committee is in and the public sentiment out there on this issue. And I guess in closing, I would say I trust the Public Service Commission. I would hope that you all would too, and let them do their work. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Bush? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, the moratorium problem. is there a way we can write an amendment? You guys aren't getting in trouble with too much wind and solar. And my understanding is a good part of what you're putting in is done at the request of specific customers that want that, willing to pay a little extra for it. Is there a way to exempt that out? Because the concern here, I think, primarily relates to the effect of the go all renewable pressure that we're getting from the West Coast states that you aren't involved with. And we're afraid, we're used to the kind of outages that we get from, high winds and coons up, climbing up poles and sitting on top of the transformer, that sort of stuff. But we are concerned that we put in too much of the renewable that's not dispatchable. We could have a major generation-based outage in the system, as a result of what's going on in those West Coast states. Is there any way we can deal with that so that we don't do harm to your company and what your guys are trying to do, and do solve the problem that we're getting into with the West Coast?
Mr. Bush. Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, I don't know for sure if there's language to put in there. There's some debate as to whether or not this draft would also cover PPAs, which could impact us as well when we are power purchase agreements. And again, that gets back to least cost supply. And if there's an ability for us to sign a PPA and decrease costs, and if it's wind, solar, I won't use Senator Beitman's term from one of the other meetings, but wherever that least cost power comes from, to have the ability for us to act in the best interest of our customers, I think is what we're looking at, and not being overregulated on what we can and can't procure.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bush.
Thank you, committee.
Welcome back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, Anthony Ornelas with Wyoming Office of Consumer Advocate. Again, I will be very brief. I would reiterate pretty much all of the comments of Ms. Bergerman, Mr. Hogeveen, and Mr. Bush, which is a fairly rare day that I'm in agreement with two of our largest utilities. However, just real quickly on 0228, again, I think we already have the tools in place to install the reliability standards. We do monitor that. We do also have additional tools in, I guess, our tool belt as a consumer advocate or as other interveners, where we could recommend some type of performance rate making policy, where if we find reliability to be a major issue, that we limit certain cost recoveries as part of our normal contested case hearings. So I think that is a tool that we already possess. On the wind and solar moratorium, again, reiterate the comments we've previously heard. There would be concerns that we would hamstring our ability in a least cost, least risk resource portfolio planning stage. So I would urge caution against that. To address a question that Senator Scott just posed to Mr. Bush about if there was some type of an amendment that could be offered to customers who want these types of resources. Again, I have some concerns or would urge caution. One of the potential pitfalls I see in that is that some of our larger, more sophisticated customers under this type of an amendment would be able to go out and kind of cherry pick the least cost, least risk, or most affordable non-fuel renewable resources for them while this moratorium was in place. And we would potentially miss out for those benefits for the broader group of customers that don't have that ability to go out and seek these type of amendments or take advantage of these type of amendments. So I would urge caution on that. On 0232, one thing I have not heard mentioned that I would bring forth for the committee's consideration is we really have to be careful or give real careful thought to how we define the term benefit. You know, it's a question, it's an issue that's been raised by the OCA and others before the commission and a variety of proceedings we've had. It is very difficult to draw a direct line to, say, I'll use Gateway South and the 2,000 megawatts of wind that are attached to it. Primarily, you know, through the IRP, it's identified that those resources are going to be needed to serve a future load growth that is happening in Utah, out in Oregon, and other states. However, it's almost impossible, in my opinion, to say that Wyoming's not going to benefit by the addition of Gateway South or Gateway West. You know, we open up additional transfer capacities on those interstate transmission lines. We have the ability to import energy into Wyoming when it's economic to do so through the EIM and other programs. So it's really difficult, and I think it'd be problematic to really put our arms around how we define benefit in terms of all these new constructions, projects, and capital investments. So again, we look at this as part of the individual filings. We raise issues of benefit to Wyoming versus other states as needed. So I'm not sure that I believe the 0232 draft would be necessary for that or enhance that. Thank you.
Questions for the OCA? All right, thank you. Oh, we do have one. Go Chairman Case.
Sorry, I just wasn't quick enough. Mr. Ornelas, were you at all bothered by the fact that there's this trading process that goes on in negotiating the multi-state protocol? And when President Rocky Mountain Power said that this gives flexibility for us to horse trade assets that may or may not benefit Wyoming, gives us flexibility, that actually bothered me quite a bit. And he said this might hamstring that. So that's why I'm hopeful that we're going to keep this bill alive for a while to maybe nail down on that. That certainly bothered me. I don't know about you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, thank you for that question. We use the term horse trading somewhat as a term of art in this industry through negotiations of rate cases, through negotiations through MSP and other means. It doesn't probably raise the level of concern that I'm picking up with your question there. You know, we try to balance the benefits and the risks of all of these very complicated and integrated decisions you've heard about today in the IRP process and the IRP process. I'm sorry, the MSP and the IRP process. So I wouldn't consider it as though we're trading a potential benefit Wyoming for some other cost to some other state. It's not really the type of horse trading that I would consider to take place, but we do try to balance amongst all 6 states the impact of our collective decisions so that no state, including Wyoming, is overtly harmed or overtly benefits as compared to other states. So we really try to level the playing field the best we can. It is getting a little bit more difficult as our legislative and state policies diverge. But again, that's the type of horse trading we do and trying to limit the impacts from one state to the next.
The Chairman Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And then you haven't been around for as much as some of the other folks in the room, but do you think that Wyoming was benefiting from resources in the Northwest prior to any new transmission being constructed? Were we benefiting from renewables without that transmission? And is there, not renewables, but benefiting, for example, from hydro without those transmission? And are there new hydro assets that Wyoming would need to have transmission to be able to take advantage of? Mr. Chairman, I would submit that there aren't any. We were benefiting all along from that old arrangement. The new arrangement is really exclusively to take wind out of Wyoming. And, you know, it's fair enough. We don't get much for it in Wyoming. So I think this is arguable anyway. And that's, I guess, one reason I hope we continue to keep this bill around.
Mr. Ornelas.
Wouldn't you agree?
Wouldn't you agree? Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Senator Case. Let me try to address all those points, and if I miss one, please clarify with me. In terms of the hydro, and if we've previously benefit, I don't think there's any doubt. There was horse trading, as we call it, or negotiations back in the original merger that brought kind of the Pacific realm to Wyoming. And I want to say that was the late 80s, early 90s, subject to check, where certain states wanted to hold tight to their hydropower and other states wanted to share in those benefits. So that sort of dynamic has existed as long as Pacific Corp has served the state of Wyoming. I agree to it to some degree, that we build new load, in this case, wind and solar, to meet future or new generation to meet future load growth. And right now that's not being driven as heavily by Wyoming as other states. So that can change though. And so that is kind of the purpose of MSP and sharing. In 1 year, Wyoming could have really strong load growth, and we're going to be benefited by the support of other states, just as we're helping to benefit some of their load growth currently. But also we don't color code electrons. So it's really difficult to say that Wyoming wind is going directly to Oregon or to Washington or somewhere else. It's really an hourly dispatch on the system. And so there are times where we're going to be benefiting from that as we ramp down more expensive resources. There's times where we're going to turn on every resource we can, and it's really difficult to see who's directly benefiting from a wind asset versus a coal or a gas asset itself.
One more try. So, Mr. Chairman, would you agree that the capability of Wyoming's coal plants, for example, in the prior generation, and I mean the fossil fuel fired generation that we had in Wyoming, was more than enough to accomplish what Wyoming needed for electricity?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, yes, I would generally agree with that statement.
So what happened was that's where roughly the 15% came from. And so that's our percent of the load. The rest exited the state on those existing lines that existed before, fossil fuel driven. Now, things haven't really changed in Wyoming. We haven't grown. Those lines are still there. We're definitely running those fossil fuel plants less, but in running those less, they have freed up capacity on those existing lines that serve Wyoming. So I'm having a difficult time seeing why we have new transmission and saying that Wyoming shares in that benefit, especially from the fact that Wyoming gets very little for the imposition on our landscapes and in our state for the presence of those new assets. And so that is my concern that I'm bringing up, and it's not all about this rate case, but as you all, I think, figured out, they haven't even brought in the capital for these transmission lines yet. Katie, bar the door. And isn't this the point where we want to position ourselves as to whether that is going to be of benefit to Wyoming or not? That's the basic question, I think.
Mr. Ornelas. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Senator Case. With your general description, I tend to agree with you. These are the types of questions on benefit and who benefits the most and who should have the cost responsibility to go along with those benefits that we do discuss in the MSP and other processes. So I do think you're hitting on a key question, and it's one that we're keenly aware of and continuing to dig into. Putting an absolute moratorium on certain types of assets, without a clear definition of how we define that benefit is perhaps problematic and quite tricky, though.
Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, we just heard from the representative from Black Hills that moratorium would cause some problems in their system. If we were to limit the moratorium to just the transmission that's authorized in the area served by the multi-state protocol, would that would that be a proper thing to do? And would that remove the difficulties that we would be causing these other companies that really aren't part of the problem, and enable us to reach the excessive amount of wind and solar non-dispatchable renewables that we are starting to see in the portfolio that's in the Rocky Mountain Power region.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Senator Scott. If I could just paraphrase to make sure I'm following. I believe the intent of that question is whether or not we change the moratorium from kind of a wind and solar to the transmission that connects those generating resources.
No, change it to the resources that are covered by that multi-state protocol, which turns out to be just the Rocky Mountain ones. But try to narrow it to where we think the problem is, as opposed to catching some of these other systems that are not a problem.
Thank you, Chairman. Senator Scott, I guess I would say I would urge caution making legislation that's designed specifically for one utility. That could be problematic. But again, I think that the processes that we already have in place, the MSP, the IRP, and the authority granted to the Public Service Commission grants all of the interested parties the opportunity to raise these type of challenges, to present evidence as to whether a specific generating asset or the transmission lines tied to them really stand to benefit one jurisdiction over the other, and the rate-making process for which we should seek recovery or allow recovery due to that. So I'm concerned with layering on these handcuffed type of policies, which really, put up sidewalls on our ability to negotiate those in good faith and to represent the citizens of Wyoming as we have done for several years now, and decades.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I'm getting pretty well concerned that the current processes are not working in controlling, Mr. Chairman, excessive renewables that are going to get us in trouble. And maybe we ought to set not a limited to the protocol the way I suggested, but limited to anything over some certain percentage that essentially corresponds to the high percentage that we are seeing in that Western system, and say we aren't going to go beyond this until we have a better handle on it. I think we need to amend it, because I think Black Hills brought us a very valid concern. But I'm looking for several different ways to do it, Mr. Chairman. I think the other way is to set a percentage that's approximately what they've got right now and say we aren't going to go over that.
Representative Knapp and then Representative Fields.
So just in hearing your answers, you were concerned with picking one utility fuel, say, over another. That already exists, does it not, with the other states? They've dictated by politics what utility will be used. And Wyoming is basically coming up with their own level, and ours is based on load. I view this as something in the future that we're looking at, because as this continues to go, as we reach the 2030 mark, we'll have a problem with load if we continue to let ourselves be a victim. So aren't you concerned with the current state of picking one utility over another, or one fuel over another, to benefit a certain state?
Chairman.
Mr. Ornelas.
Thank you. Representative Knapp, thank you for that question. Certainly there are states out there that we've heard of today that have certain types of renewable portfolio standards. I think where my concern with this proposed legislation from Wyoming comes in is not so much in the idea that we want to set some sort of standard, but we are perhaps considering eliminating what is currently shown to be low cost, least risk resources. So if we do that, the alternative for Wyoming would be the next highest, maybe not highest, but a higher cost resource. That will ultimately trickle down to the ratepayers through fuel cost or other charges. And we can debate the merits of federal policy or individual state policy, but at the time with production tax credits, with the IRA that adds another 10% bonus for pretty much all renewables across the state of Wyoming, there are real incentives to look at these types of generating resources over others. And I'm just concerned putting up some sort of arbitrary wall that precludes that. I'm pretty agnostic, quite frankly. I want least cost, least risk resources for the state of Wyoming, wherever we can find that, nuclear, coal, gas, wind, or solar. I just don't want to take one of those, arrows out of my quiver for future planning purposes.
Representative Haroldson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm sitting here and I'm looking at the sustainability report for Black Hills. And I see Mr. Bush has left the room and he might be able to answer this, but
He's still here.
Where are you hiding? Okay, you might want to come up and answer this. But looking at the pathway to a cleaner energy future, I see on the bottom of the line, retirement of coal, retirement of diesel, release of purchase agreement, retirement of diesel, retirement of coal. And on top, I see adding solar, wind, batteries, solar, wind, batteries, solar, wind, batteries, solar, wind, batteries. And there's going to come a point where we already know batteries 4 hours. Maybe we're going to get a lot better technology. And I'm going to say the same thing I said from the beginning of this conversation, long before we had the rate increase conversation. It's this: show me something that works and let's have a conversation. But right now we're not seeing things that actually we know work. And all we're getting at this point is the idea that, well, maybe we could do this because it's going to keep the EPA happy. It's going to keep Oregon happy, Washington happy. Well, frankly, Wyoming's not happy. And we're not okay with that because we have technology that we can prove cost-effective, reliable power. We've done it for generations. We can do it for generations more, but we're stuck in a 1940 pickup truck going 80 down the interstate when we could build brand new trucks. So why is it that we're seeing in these energy portfolios all of the baseload generations being taken offline and everything being renewable based? So I stand with the other senators and reps up here that are saying we just question what happens in the future. Today, yeah, it doesn't matter because those workhorses are trains are still coming into the yard. But what happens when they don't? And what happens when everyone wants the power that we all want to charge our cars, to run our houses, to run the AC, all of those things, when we're doing it on wind, solar, and batteries?
Chairman, please. Thank you, Representative Haroldson. Great points, and I pretty much agree with everything you've stated. I don't think, though, we can be blind to our current situation, which is, despite all of our disagreement, I think, for most of us in this room, EPA regulations, we have to consider those. So Jim Bridger 1 and 2 comes to mind. Legacy resources have played an important part of our generation mix in this state for 4 decades now. However, we have to consider that without adding expensive new environmental controls, selective catalytic reduction, which costs hundreds of millions per unit, that we're not going to be able to run those like we did in yesteryear. So we have to take that consideration, that new cost consideration, into account and compare that against the alternative, which may be a renewable, converting it to natural gas, or perhaps nuclear resources if that technology comes to fruition. We really are in this kind of tenuous spot where we're kind of hoping the technology catches up to our policy visions at a federal level and other states, not necessarily Wyoming. So it is a real tight balancing act that we're trying to walk. But to say that we just can't build new wind and solar because we have coal is going to have these challenges, and it's going to be forced to shut absent some major shift on the current trajectory we find ourselves. So that's why, again, I don't want to take too many arrows out of my quiver as we face these challenges. I'm not supporting wind or solar. I just want the option to look at it and study it and decide if it's best for Wyoming or not in the future.
Representative Haroldson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me clarify, I'm against a moratorium. And the reason I'll say that is this, that's not fair to the industry or a wise practice because it's the world we live in. But the problem is at some point, we're gonna have to start asking your question. Because we are so far behind the 8 ball right now, it's not even funny. And we're building fields that, I mean, in my county, we have 1,700 megawatts. And in a moment, we can have it. I mean, we would have to cover my entire county with windmills to make 1,700 megawatts. Like, you better like them in your yard. So we got to ask these questions, guys. And that's why I'm saying this. We're here today to ask the questions that maybe people aren't asking of what's next. How do we as legislators, how do we as this governing body in the state of Wyoming help you guys push back on this stuff in such a way that we can actually try to turn the tide back on this?
Chairman, thank you, Representative Haroldson. Again, I think you're hitting on all of the pertinent and really critical points. I don't think I have an answer for you sitting here on the path forward other than to stay engaged at the federal level. On the individual state policies, my office and other interveners, we closely scrutinize what comes through the IRP, the MSP, and a general rate case. If Oregon wants to set their own course, they have that prerogative. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that they do not influence our cost or our reliability from Wyoming's standpoint. But in general, that's not the major driver at this point, in my opinion. It's the federal oversight, that's dictating. We're never going to have a new coal plant built as far as I can see it. So we need to consider that. Most of our coal plants are 30, 40, sometimes 50 years old. Even absent federal policies, that are kind of accelerating their shutdown, these things are not going to last forever. So it's important we start getting into the nuclear technology and advancing battery storage and really the all of the above strategy that we've heard come out of the governor's office. So, that is my take there on 0231 about limiting or moratorium on any particular type of investment. I think it's best to keep them all in the pot, really dive into what is truly least cost, least risk, and benefits Wyoming, and then we can handle the rest of that through rate-making processes and tools already available to the Public Service Commission.
Mr. Bush, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, I feel compelled to, Mr. Chairman.
Where have you been?
Was hiding in the back with my colleague from the co-ops. So to Representative Haroldson's point, and I love how much Googling he does. He's all over the internet. So I think it's safe to say when we rolled out our, for lack of a better term, ESG plan a few years ago, this is aspirational goals, I think is the best way to put it. If battery storage and battery capabilities are there, we'll take a better or stronger look at that. Right now, we've got all of our coal is still online. We just built a gas facility east of town here in 2014, so that's not going anywhere anytime soon. We're also still looking at Bright Loop. I don't think this committee maybe has seen that presentation. Minerals has. It's a coal to hydrogen project that we're working on. We're hoping to get some funding through DOE, but DOE is not very, at least this DOE is not very favorable to coal. We did get some funding for a natural gas demonstration project at our Pueblo facility, which doesn't help Wyoming, but we applied for the coal one and they said, yeah, don't even really go forward with your application. And they're not doing anything with coal. So part of this, when you talk about how to push back and help us out, I think you guys are doing all that you can. Old saying, right? Elections have consequences. So we are not, we can't operate in a vacuum. We have the EPA that we have to deal with. We have multiple states that we have to deal with. Thankfully for us, South Dakota and Wyoming are pretty aligned on what they want. And that's what we're striving to do. Our diesel facilities, and these are in South Dakota, so I'm not as familiar with them. I think we're built in the 50s and 60s, and they're 20 or 30 megawatts worth of power that's been serving Rapid City. So they're not very efficient and not very useful anymore. So they're about to go away. We are looking at some renewables up there because, again, we have customers that are asking for it. So we're looking at adding some renewables. But right now, we are not shutting down any of our dispatchable power in order to replace it with renewables. And again, we have carbon capture that we're looking at through House Bill 200. We've got we had some RFPs go out. We've got responses to that we're looking at and trying to figure out what's going to work best for us. Again, that's a difficult process to go through with technology that's not quite there. It's close, but it's not quite there, and it's very expensive. I'm interested to see Petronova, I guess, is ramping back up down in Texas now that oil is back up to $90 or $100 a barrel, whatever it is. I know diesel's $4.29 a gallon, because I paid for that the other day. So maybe that'll help with things, but we're making investments in the thermal side as much as we can. That's also a clean side. And part of that is not only because we have EPA and state restrictions, mostly EPA, federal side anyway, we also have bankers and people that invest capital in utilities telling us that that's what they want. So we're also beholden to them. And that's just the way it is. We have to borrow money to build these projects, and sometimes we have to bend there. Now, again, these are aspirational goals. If the technology is there, sure. If the technology is not there, we're not going to put our customers and our reliability at risk by investing in batteries that may not do what they need to do for us. So that, I hope I answered it and got there maybe.
Mr. Brown?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Chris Brown representing Powering Up Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, for the past two meetings, we've seen the utility make a presentation that illustrates that fuel costs are the primary driver behind the proposed rate increase. And I want to make it clear that I am not speaking in favor of the proposed rate increase. But we've heard that fuel costs are primarily driving that, and that renewables and wind primarily have helped keep those costs down. Simultaneously, Mr. Chairman, we heard from the organization that represents some of the largest consumers of electricity in the state, saying that they are concerned that if we remove renewables from the portfolio, that will cause rates to increase. Almost every expert in the room today has testified that in order to provide the most reliable and least cost electricity to consumers, both industrial and residential, we need to have all options on the table. And so considering that, and considering the fact that last meeting we also learned that the utility has to go in front of the PSC and in a court-style setting prove that that rate increase is justified and is of public benefit before it is approved. That case, as everybody in the room knows, is still ongoing. And so it seems extremely premature to make such a drastic decision as far as a moratorium on not just renewables, but on any of our forms of energy. Mr. Chairman, my organization supports all of the above energy policy. And the last thing I wanted to point out was that the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle last week ran a poll in their paper about whether the public supported a moratorium on renewable energy or not. 75% of respondents did not support a moratorium on renewable energy. And so, Mr. Chairman, we stand respectfully opposed, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Brown? All right. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mayor Collins, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Mayor Patrick Collins from the city of Cheyenne. You know, when people come and speak to the city council, a lot of times they don't have all the information. And so I freely admit I don't know exactly all the things that have gone into the decisions that you made to bring 231 to this point. But I would like to share a little bit about the fears we have with what those impacts might be. Our community has spent the last 30 years working to make ourselves ready so that we can bring the industries in to our community that will make us resilient and strong through the highs and the lows of our state's economy, rooms and the busts that go on. And in the last few years, we've made some really significant gains. We've had gains in family-owned manufacturing. Places like Searing Industries has like 450,000 square feet and is building steel products and sending them all over the country. Eagle Claw just moved their headquarters here to Cheyenne, 115,000 square foot building. Two Bending Concepts moved out of Colorado. Precious Cat's here now. We've had a lot of success in technology and data centers. I think part of it is we have the backbone of the internet running right down east and west, and so we're perfectly located. Our climate is great for those kinds of industries. And today we have 3 Microsoft campuses, Lunavi, the Microsoft or Dish Network. So we have some really large employers who are here. And one of the things I love about the data centers are they come with really high-paying jobs, but there's not a lot of them. I know that sounds bad, but with our housing situation that we're working with today, it's perfect. And these jobs pay, I mean, they pay really, really well. They're also huge property taxpayers, even though they don't have a lot of employees. These are billion-dollar facilities. And just for a little town like ours, it's $1 billion is $760,000 in our general fund each and every year. And then they also use electricity at an ungodly rate. And so those sales tax on electricities fund our operations here. In the queue right now, we just had a leads meeting this morning, our economic development agency. We have 4 or 5 data centers in the queue right now. And as I sit and talk to them, they really love what's happening in Cheyenne. We have one called Cosmo. We've been working on this project for 5 years, and we just got a development agreement from them. We are this close to an 800,000 square foot facility. That's one phase of 3, 2.4 million square feet total. Microsoft has the 3 campuses. They're in the process right now of expanding all of those campuses. The Microsoft out west of town next to the Walmart distribution center started about a decade ago. They've never stopped constructing. As soon as they finish one data center, they start building the next one. We have 2 projects that we're working on right now. We call them Bronco Philly and Equality. These are huge additional 400-acre data center campuses that we just did the entitlement processes on. They're annexed, they're zoned, and they're ready to start construction next year. And then on top of that, we have an energy company, multiple energy companies. One we call Project Jade. It's a hydrogen company. They have land. We've given them we've committed to 4 million gallons of water that'll be coming out of our water treatment plant, our wastewater treatment plant, stuff that we would just put down the creek, but they can use that and create hydrogen. And so we're working with that company right now. But one of the things I've learned from all these as I sit across the table and we talk about what is it going to take to get them to come to Cheyenne is they all require renewable energy. They tell me that their customers require it, and so they have to require it. And so when we talk about that, we're talking about Cosmo, the large one that we just got the development agreement for. When they're built out, that's 900 megawatts of electricity. Jade, when they're built out, will be 300 megawatts of electricity. So Cheyenne, for decades, has been a little 150 megawatt city. Just nice little utility. It's been going on for a long time. We're well over 300 megawatts today. And my gut is a decade from now, we'll be 1,000, 1,200 megawatts or more. And so we've got to do something. I don't want to see these jobs leave our community. And so I don't want to see transmission lines be built into. I'd like to see us have the projects close by that will provide the electricity for these facilities. So we have a group called Cowboy 1 and 2, where our elites people are down in Texas talking to them today. It's a 900 megawatt solar facility that they have the land in there. We're almost to the industrial siting process, or the industrial siting commission. We have Next Air Energy, who's asking to expand their wind energy, not to send that stuff to Utah and to other places, but to serve the businesses we're trying to create here in Laramie County. And so I'm really concerned about what this moratorium talk does to our reputation in this industry. We have people calling us all the time saying, we hear what a great environment is to do a data center. And if they Google Cheyenne and it says we're gonna have a moratorium on the renewable energies, I think that conversation is gonna be really short, or we won't even have it at all. And so I hope that at 231, we can get away from the delays, because from Laramie County, from Cheyenne, I mean, this is our future. We spent 30 years building, and I mean, we have the thing called progress and prosperity, where our local people have raised more than $10 million of our own money to buy the business parks and build the infrastructure, so that we're ready to do it. And here we are today, ready to go. And I'm just terrified that 231 could put a stop to all of this great work. Thank you.
Representative Wiley.
Thank you for coming down, Mr. Mayor. You think that if you were facing a 30% rate increase on your energy, that you'd still be seeing the interest from these data centers that take so much energy to operate?
Mayor Collins.
Mr. Chairman, through you to the representative, sir, I don't know the answer to that. I don't understand all the inputs that go with a data center. I know that in other places, there's a lot of other costs that go along with the cooling and the dehumidifying and stuff. So I do not understand the industry well enough. I couldn't answer that question. I just don't know.
Representative Wiley.
Mr. Mayor, in my country, where my constituents are, it is affecting that. Wouldn't you agree?
I've read the newspaper, Mr. Chairman, so I definitely understand. I'm a small business person also, and a 30% increase to my small business would not be a comfortable thing. And that would be hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month. And so I understand your concern, sir.
Co-Chairman Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's slightly afield, but I was thinking about you this morning, Mr. Mayor. I was thinking about the fact that I think the city of Cheyenne is one of the largest landholders in Wyoming. You're pretty big. I don't know how you rank, but you're up there pretty high. And on those, in that land, you have leased out property. You receive payments from renewable energy companies for placement of their facilities on your land. That's great. But I'm wondering if I could get a breakdown of those payments, say for the past 5 or 10 years, and where they're expected to go. And it must be public information somewhere. And I was actually thinking of giving your office a call and ask that information. So I guess I'd request it now. And the reason I ask it is we often find that in Wyoming, everybody's benefiting from renewable energies except for the government. And you're unique. You're not the government. You don't tax it in the sense that, but you lease out your property. And I have noticed that landowners are very complimentary because they're doing really well with respect to renewable placement. My point in a lot of this is that the state's not doing really well, not in proportion to what we're giving up. And so I've heard a rumor, I think there's a previous mayor that mentioned that you might get $1 million a year from those leases. I don't know if that's true or not. And if it's a bad number, should quell it right now. And I apologize, but I would like to know the real numbers. I appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, the senator is correct. We are a large landholder. We bought in 2003, we bought an 18,800 acre ranch just west of this community. We bought that for water, the Casper aquifer is there, the Ogallala aquifer is there. We think there's 1,500 acre feet of water a year that will help us in our future growth. We also bought it because there's a site there that will give us a place for a future landfill. That our landfill was good for another 50 or 60 years, but those are going to be tough to site in the future. And so we bought the ranch at that time for that. And then our past governing body before I became mayor did sign a contract with NextEra Energy to put windmills or generation on the ranch. And I think that number is just under $900,000 a year that we get for those windmills.
Mr. Chairman.
Co-Chairman Case.
And just to follow up, kind of like to know the numbers by year and whether you've got new facilities. I don't know if the new solar farm is on your land or not. So just kind of like to know. That ought to be public information. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, to the senator, we do not have any other facilities. The Q cells is down on the state line on private property, and the 900 megawatt Cowboy project that's coming to us is also not on our property. So the only thing we have is just the one. And I would say that, when we talk about the state benefiting, I find that interesting because, these renewables that are going to build these data centers, we get about $1 million a year in sales tax on a data center. They use a lot of electricity, maybe not plus or minus a little bit, but we get 30 cents of the fourth penny. The state gets the rest of it. And so if we're getting $1 million, you're getting 3-point-something million for every $1 million that we get. So I think the state really does benefit. So as we're building these new industries and they're doing that, maybe you're not getting it on the generation side, but you're sure getting it on the use side.
Mr. Chairman, well, I push back a little bit, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure that, I think the data centers would still come here. They'd still obtain their wind energy. Black Hills would work very hard to do that. You kind of benefit on both ends because you actually are a landlord. And I think that's my point. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, it's good planning, right? Thank you.
Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, Mayor Collins. It's nice to see you there today. Very interesting. I was surprised as I drove from Cheyenne to Laramie at the enormity of Cheyenne. It's really a lot larger than I had thought. I just wanted to ask, just to get it in my mind, earlier testimony, people had said that Germany has for years had the majority of the renewables, and they are finding that although they are as in tune with data centers and things as we are, that's not working for them. Other testimonies said that it takes about 3 times as much with the wind as I believe it was coal, correct me if I'm wrong, about 3 times the amount of equipment or whatever to produce the same amount. The other thing I was wondering, or is that true? And how does that work with all of the land that has to be there? I know that the land there along I-80 is getting pretty full and over there. But how much land is that going to incorporate? Is any of it going to be just eminent domain, or how's that going to work as the years go on? I was also wondering, with the air quality in Cheyenne, I wasn't aware that there was really a problem to invoke all of this concern. And I guess the last comment and or question that I might have would be nope, that'll do until I hear your answers. Thank you.
Mayor Collins.
Mr. Chairman, through you to the representative, I'm not sure that I'm qualified to answer those questions. It makes sense to me that the wind doesn't blow all the time, so that, it would not be as effective as, something else that was burning a fossil fuel as far as, providing the electricity. But I'm just not, I don't believe I'm qualified to answer, the questions. Is the city looking to use eminent domain? Of course not. That's not something we want to do. In order to do that, I think there's plenty of private individuals who are looking to capitalize on their land that are interested in allowing us to expand business centers or business parks and supply the equipment that's needed to run them.
Follow up.
Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, I was just as a note of information for you. I was able to be down along the I-70 corridor in Colorado here just a while back. And one of the things that I've noticed was a fire going on. And so I asked what it was. It was the second one that had happened. And it was this solar along with the ground and stuff. And it's right there as you are by the forest. So I would just really give a word of caution to look into that. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bob? Thanks, Mayor Collins.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Bob Jensen. I'm with law firm Holland and Hart, and I'm here on behalf. Bob. The green light's on.
Maybe scoot a little closer. There you go.
Okay, thank you. I'm Bob Jensen with Holland and Hart. I also represent the American Clean Power Association. American Clean Power is represents the companies in Wyoming that have energy projects that are operating or being developed here. And of course, American Clean Power opposes the proposed legislation 24 LSO 0231 for several reasons. And they've been stated a lot here today, so I won't repeat all of those, but clearly that sends a message to the developers and the operators of renewable energy projects that Wyoming is not friendly for those investments, billions of dollars of investments, and it puts that at risk. And that's one. The second point is renewable energy is, as has been stated again, part of the overall component mix of the portfolio of energy resources that we have in Wyoming. Putting a moratorium on that would send the exact wrong message for the use of all the above energy resources that we're blessed with. And more than likely, it would raise the cost of electricity for ratepayers. And I'd finally like to make a point that I'm very pleased today because Senator Case and I agree on a piece of legislation that should not move forward. And I'm proud to say that I agree with Senator Case on that.
Sounds like a rare day in legislative history. Ma'am, welcome.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name's Claire Duder, and I'm a staff member with Powder River Basin Resource Council, a local grassroots nonprofit. And I'll keep my comments brief to avoid repeating too much of what's been said. But as far as the moratorium goes, we really urge the members of the committee to vote no on this. Like what's been said, renewables have saved customers money, and especially in light of this rate increase proposal, we think it's important to keep the option of renewables open. On top of that, we're concerned that this is government overreach. It's choosing winners and losers, choosing fossil fuels over renewables. So we really urge you to proceed with caution on that. And as far as 232 electricity rates for costs that do not benefit Wyoming, we also urge you to proceed with caution and oppose this bill. I know a lot of the conversation has revolved around renewable energy, and we've even brought up hydro, but one thing we're wondering is how does nuclear fit into this conversation? How does it fit into this bill? Especially since it is a carbon-free energy source. It helps meet other states' climate goals, but it's very expensive and impacts Wyoming ratepayers in that way as well. So those are my comments, and I'll stand for questions. Thank you.
Representative Harrelson? No? All right. You're on deck.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is John Burrows, and I'm here representing the Wyoming Outdoor Council. There are thousands of members statewide. I prepared a longer testimony specific to the moratorium, so 0231, which I think I can summarize very quickly. All the points that I had brought up have been hit. But we're opposed to this bill and really don't think that resorting to an extreme measure like a moratorium is a good policy choice for Wyoming. We do think it picks winners and losers, and we actually think that the committee could study the questions that it has without such a heavy-handed measure here. So really thank you for your time today. A long day, appreciate it. Stand for any questions.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Any public testimony in the virtual world?
Mr. Chairman, we have Jody Levin online.
Ms. Levin?
All right, let's let her in. Any other public testimony in the room? All right, Ms. Levin may be our last witness.
Not least.
No.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Case, and members of the committee. I greatly appreciate the ability to appear virtually today. I had a conflicting meeting. My name is Jody Levin. I think most of you know I represent the Trona industry, but today I'm appearing on behalf of the Wyoming Mining Association. Mr. Detai is testifying at the Regulatory Reduction Task Force meeting. So we've got a couple of dual commitments here. I'm not going to repeat much of what you've already heard today or what I testified to at your August committee meeting. Rocky Mountain Power's proposed rate case is of significant concern to the Wyoming Mining Association member companies. In some instances, companies are looking at the possibility of having to pause projects or cancel them altogether. You've certainly seen the concerns from the Trona industry about competitiveness. So your consideration of these issues is incredibly timely and incredibly important. I would encourage you to move forward with your overall review. I echo a number of the concerns you've heard today, but I'd also encourage you to move forward with the concepts that you heard from Ms. Briggerman that the Wyoming Industrial Energy consumers brought forward to you today. The Wyoming Mining Association does not take a position on those concepts at this point, but we do believe they're at least worth reviewing at your next meeting or even possibly into future meetings, next interim or even in the session. Much of what we've heard today, we know, of course, will not impact this rate case, but there will be future rate cases. And if future rate cases are proposing anywhere near what we're seeing with this rate case, you will likely see industries no longer be able to operate in Wyoming. So I would just encourage you to keep this topic moving forward. If nothing else, part of this just preserves your ability to help ensure Wyoming has the resources it needs as it faces these issues with other states. Perhaps that's even looking at, does Wyoming have the resources it needs for negotiations in the multi-state protocol? All of these are, again, incredibly timely and incredibly important, and we just greatly appreciate the committee's attention to these issues. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will stop my testimony because I know you've heard a lot today. Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Levin? Yes, Representative Wiley.
Ms. Levin, I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Well, what kind of economic impact would it be towards the state if the Trona patch has to shut down a fraction of their other projects that they have moving forward right now for state revenue?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Wiley, so the Trona industry represents about $500 million of economic activity. They employ 2,300 current employees. And of course, the big concern is with expansion projects that did not pencil out a 33% rate increase. So will this cause them to scale that back? Possibly. They're in a competitive market, and their biggest competitors come from overseas with synthetic resources. So it's something that ultimately, will the consumer choose to continue to buy soda ash and Trona from Wyoming, or will it look to buy those synthetic options instead? And that's very market driven. But it is a concern, an enormous concern, because it is a highly competitive market. So that it does certainly put some of the other projects at risk.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, am I right in thinking that those competitive synthetic soda ash products are manufactured with electricity derived from coal-fired power plants in China?
Ms. Levin.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Scott, I don't know the exact resource mix in China, but certainly China does have coal-fired generation and is building more of it routinely.
Co-Chairman Case.
Ms. Levin, thank you. I like your testimony a lot more than Deti's, so just tell him that. Actually, we're sorry he's not here too, but Trona is an important commodity with respect to the tax base of Wyoming. We get a severance and an ad valorem for every single ton of Trona that's produced. It's probably between, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's, I'm going to guess 12% for the combine of the taxes plus the severance plus the ad valorem. So hypothetically, I know you won't even reveal prices, but if a ton of Trona, for each ton of Trona, say it's worth $200, we would get $24 off of that ton. That's a lot of money. That's money that we can count on for years and years and years if we can keep this industry going. Is that roughly correct? And I don't want you to spill any beans about competitive prices.
Ms. Levin?
Mr. Chairman and Co-Chairman Case, because I do represent the industry, they often keep me out of any pricing conversations. So I will pass on the pricing question, but I do want to point out, because it isn't just Trona. I mean, Trona is certainly a concern for me with my representation of the industry, but this is also a concern for uranium. It's a concern for rare earths. I mean, these are industries that, unlike Trona, are trying to get established in Wyoming. And at the public hearing in Casper, I testified there on behalf of the Wyoming Mine Association. It was joined by the president and CEO from UR Energy, Uranium One. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I can't remember the exact company, but he echoed and joined me in that testimony about what this potential rate case will do to their industry that's just trying to get up and get started. So these are ongoing concerns, and I think our overall message to the committee is that we appreciate that you have taken this issue up, and along with prices, I'd be remiss if I didn't add reliability is equally or possibly even more important. It certainly is another critical element to the Trona industry. Even small disruptions in power can be catastrophic to the industry. If they had a major power outage in winter months, it would take the industry offline weeks, months, potentially even a year. So these are important conversations to be having, and we appreciate your attention to it.
Additional questions for Ms. Levin? All right, thank you, Ms. Levin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We have Ms. Shaver.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Marcy Shaver. I live in Torrington, and where I'm a retired business owner. In 2005 or 6, because of the Iraqi war, natural gas prices more than doubled. Laundromats run on natural gas, some sort of thermal heat to dry clothes, to heat water. And when I opened that bill, and my gas bill had more than doubled, it went from about $300 a month to over $1,100. There was nothing I could do except pass that cost through to my customers and ride the market out until the innovation that brought the flood of natural gas to the market lowered the prices again. But we aren't sitting here in an isolated world. It's not just Wyoming. What happens on the other side of the world directly affects our prices. And one of the biggest natural gas producers in the world is under moratorium and is not getting gas out legally to any of Europe or the United States, which means that the few producers left are just going with the highest price they can possibly get. And we're sort of stuck with it until something happens in between Ukraine and Russia. Oh, and that's the reason Germany is switching so many coal plants last year in this. switching to coal from natural gas. And that's all I have to say. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Jennifer, for your testimony and for joining us. Committee, any questions?
Of course.
All right, thank you again. Mr. Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief on first off, I am a registered lobbyist. However, I'm strictly speaking on my own behalf in our businesses. On 228, I just would urge caution. I think you've heard testimony that perhaps the Public Service Commission already has these abilities, and how will this affect the multi-state protocol? On 231, some of the flaws with it, besides it just being really onerous, which I can't support it to begin with, but I was curious on exactly if I am in the pipeline, which we have a wind project within Natrona County that's still being in the process. We have a solar farm in process, but they haven't begun to build. So does that become part of the moratorium? I don't see any grandfathering in this piece or any language that way. But so I'm not even offering caution. I just would urge you not to try to put a piece or component of that into whatever you end up coming out with. On 232, I am not sure if portions of this are the way to go. I understand you're wanting to produce something, but bad legislation, as you well know, is more hurtful than it's worth. And I think our consumers demand more of us, speaking previously, than producing something that you're not going to be totally happy with. So with that, thank you. And please don't include any of 231 in retrospect or anything. So appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Sweeney. With that, I think I'll close public comment. Committee, bring you back to the bills we have. Let's do this. Is there any motion on 24 LSO 0231?
And say the name.
Sorry. 0231, moratorium on new wind and solar in electricity rates. Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, let me outline a proposal if we're going to proceed with this.
I'm just asking if there's a motion on the bill.
I'd be willing to move it for some discussion.
Okay. There's a second?
I'll second it so we can hear Senator Scott's proposal.
Yeah, you senators are so kind to each other.
Mr. Chairman.
That's why we don't have the uniparty in the Senate.
Mr. Chairman, what I'm thinking is if the committee is willing to proceed with this at all, I'm going to suggest we do several things here. I would suggest that we need to exempt the Cheyenne situation. I think we've heard some good testimony there. And I would like to see exemption drafted two separate ways so we can pick and choose. One would be to have a draft moratorium on wind and solar generation as written in 231, but over a certain percentage of the total generation. And ask the Public Service Commission to give us a report as to what those current percentages are in each of the investor-owned systems in the state and what's projected to happen in the next few years in the future, so we can see what we're doing. Second would be to have the moratorium drafted as it applies only to the multi-state protocol. So we've got a choice as to which way to do a moratorium. And then I would combine it with 228, because I think there is some virtue there. But I would remove that last sentence in 238 on the action to recover. But the way 228 is written, Mr. Chairman, I think it fits well with 231 and says, okay, we're going to use the moratorium to figure out what limits what amount of wind and solar we really can effectively have without getting ourselves in trouble.
Well, Co-Chairman Case, you seconded all that, so.
So, Mr. Chairman, I can't really go down that road, but I did want to hear it out. I do think there's some merit with respect to the multi-state protocol to have a moratorium or not. But I think, Senator Scott, that would be accomplished the same thing by the issue of the assets, whether they're used and used for Wyoming, and we wouldn't actually have to outlaw technology in that way. So I'm hoping we wouldn't go down the route of specifying the technology, and that we'd let the economics of our determination specify the technology.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Scott.
I'm afraid they're going to find anything is of some use to us.
That's possible.
And I think we won't get anywhere unless we a little fiercer than that.
Well, I think whether we keep, Mr. Chairman, whether we keep 231 on the table or not, I would not support keeping it on the table in any form.
Yeah, I'm pretty strongly opposed to keeping 231 on the table as well. I think I've heard enough today that gives me pause that we would be stepping into territory that we actually increase rates, which is the exact opposite of why we've been here today. So it gives me great pause to move any version of that forward. All right. All those in favor of moving 0231 moratorium on new wind and solar and electricity rates signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
Okay. How about 24 LSO 0228 Public Service Commission electricity reliability? We have a motion on that. All right. Senator Scott?
Okay, I'll move it.
You moved it, you kind of moved it in your last one.
Yeah.
So I was assuming you were going to want to do this. Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Representative Knapp. Senator Boner, were you just going to second it?
Oh, thanks. Yes, sure.
Okay, we got 2 seconds. It's good enough. One from the House and one from the Senate. Discussion. Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I really appreciate all the testimony and people taking valuable time to come in front of us today to talk to us about all these bills. I think we absorbed all of the concerns. I share some of them, to be honest. But I also can't tell you how important it is based on all the constituents who have reached out to me on this topic. And for that reason. On these next couple of bills, specific to the one that has been motioned right here, I'm going to support it to go forward. I don't know if I can get there by November, or if this is one of the vehicles that we want to move forward with and maybe put in the green books. But I'm going to support it today just because I think it's important that we continue the conversation. And so I just wanted to throw that out.
Can I ask for a clarification, Senator Scott? Is your motion to adopt this as a committee bill?
No.
Your motion is to move it forward to the
For
next meeting?
Next meeting.
Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, I've got 3 suggested changes. Do you want to hear them or not
Yep.
right now?
Yep, let's take them.
Mr. Chairman,
Be careful what you do with it.
first thing I would do would be on page 2, line 14. After the word establish, insert the words by December 15th, 2024. So we say we want it done by this time. Second, standards for electric reliability relating to adequate dispatchable power. So we're not talking about the coon on top of the transformer and all and the wind blowing down the power pole, all those normal things we see. We're talking about, is there enough dispatchable power to be reliable? So I would add that. And then I would suggest removing the sentence on page 3, an action to recover for any loss, damage, et cetera. I think that's an invitation to trouble.
Is that a motion?
Yep, all 3 of those.
Moved and seconded. Any,
First 2, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
First one, page 2, line 14, after the word establish, by December 15th, 2024. And mind you, this is for the draft going forward, so we may change the date. What's a placeholder date in there? Second one is after electric reliability on line 15, page 2, insert relating to adequate dispatchable power generation. And then removal of that sentence on page 3, Mr. Chairman.
lines 5 through 9
Yeah.
after the period.
Question?
All right, all those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, that amendment has been adopted. Any further discussion on the bill draft? No. All those in favor of moving the bill draft forward to our next meeting signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, 24 LSO 0228, that moves forward. Last one we have is 24 LSO 0232. Representative Wiley?
I would like to propose an amendment,
We gotta move. the
or
bill
I would
first.
like to move the bill.
Okay, moved by Representative Wiley,
Second.
seconded by Co-Chairman Case, and you have an amendment?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Page 2, line 8, I would like to add the language in there where you say to meet the power needs, but I would like to add special or specific, and then I think that will remedy some of the concerns that we heard here today.
Could you say that
All right,
again?
yeah, one more time.
Yeah, so hold on just a second.
Page 2,
So
line
page
8.
2, line 8. So you read, it reads specifically to meet, and then I would like to add some kind of language that says the specific or the special electricity service requirements established by other states. I believe that that'll put some sideboards to where it just counters other states stepping beyond the multi-state protocol.
And so, Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question?
Yes, Co-Chairman Case.
So that would be like the renewable portfolio standards, is that kind of what you're talking about? But I don't think we want to put that in the bill.
Representative Wiley?
Correct.
So you could say specific generation mixes specified by other states, for example. And I would second that.
Friendly.
Representative Newsom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you read that whole sentence starting on line 6 with the amendment?
Sure. Costs may be excluded, including the capital costs associated with facilities that are built specifically to meet what was the language, Senator Case?
The generation mix specified by other states. Or tech generation, the mix of generation technologies. And is it clear to everyone that the including is an open-ended specification? There could be things other than this.
Correct.
Yeah, sometimes we get that anyway, I'll shut up.
Mr. Anderson, are you clear on what we're doing? Okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That amendment has been adopted. Any other amendments or discussion on this bill? All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that was, just to clarify, that was just a motion to move it forward to the next meeting.
And Mr. Chairman, does that complete the bills that we had?
It does.
How about the proposals by Ms. Briggerman?
Yeah, I know I am particularly interested in number 1. And I don't know I'm not sold on the way to approach it, but I believe there's 2 states to look at. The state of Utah, it was described to me that this state just simply, or the state of Utah has a statute that simply just says, Public Service Commission, figure it out. You get to put the rules in place. And maybe that's the easiest way to do it. And I don't know, I can't speak to Oregon. I don't know what that state looks like. Of course, we could also just approach it on our own as well. But I think this concept has a lot of merit.
So, Mr. Chairman, just by going through this list, I'm not sure that any of these are extensive bill draft requirements. I'm not sure I see the harm in having them drafted in bill form, putting it out to the public and letting them comment on it. There was a previous bill about 4, which was the third party within a boundary of a fence of an industrial consumer. That's already exists somewhere, but I don't remember the year. The others, they strike me as being fairly simple. It seems like we could have them drafted without prejudice and put it out for notice to the public. See what they say.
I'm not opposed to it as long as we don't plan on talking about elections in our last meeting.
Mr. Chairman, how many bill drafts do we have going into our last meeting?
Well, we knocked off a couple today. Josh, how many bills do we have? How many bills have we advanced? Do you know off the top of your head?
I don't know, Mr. Chairman. From the last meeting, we did pass a couple of those election bills, but the majority of those are still there. Of course, we've already heard those once. So those were mostly with just some amendments in the bills today. I think there were 2 additional new bills that were requested at the last meeting. And then anything new today.
Mr. Chairman, we did talk about combining those election bills. Is that still a possibility, Josh?
The omnibus election bill.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we can definitely.
See, we only have 1 bill next. Well, we typically have a big election bill. That's frequent.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Wiley.
I think that the third party generation might have some unintended consequences to the ratepayers for the residential. I would be okay with leaving that out. The 2 on here that I would like to see move forward are 1 and 2 that the WIEC proposed.
I fail to see the harm in having it on the table, Mr. Chairman. And you know, as we go forward, we're all hesitant, Mr. Chairman, to go to a competition in Wyoming. It's kind of a two-edged sword. There'll be some very large customers that benefit well from it. There might be some municipalities that would benefit from it and change the way they provide electricity. But I'm not in favor of going to full-blown competition, but I do see these critical industries where they're obviously providing a subsidy to everyone else. Otherwise, if they can do it cheaper themselves, why shouldn't we let them? What's the benefit of forcing them to subsidize the rest of the ratepayers? I realize it keeps rates down, but it also hampers those industries in a world competitive market and other states where they can go. So I'm thinking there's a balance there as we go forward in a new world.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Landon.
Just real quickly to add to what the senator was saying, I generally don't feel like there's harm in having something on the table that we might learn from. And quite honestly, third-party issues, I don't know all the issues related to why we would or would not want to take a look at it. Chances are it's not something that we want to pursue or we don't go there, but as long as the two chairmen feel like we've got time, we're going to be together in November anyway. And I think it's valuable, to me for sure, to learn everything we can about this Western power grid and generation and the issues that our industrial customers and our residential customers face out there. So I would err on the side of bringing them.
And Mr. Chairman, one more thing.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry. We're here today because our leadership asked us to do this. And they also indicated that they'd be favorable to as much time as we need on these issues. I mean, I think that's fair, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
So if the 2-day meeting turned into a 3-day meeting in November, it wouldn't be the end of the world.
October.
Yeah, October, I'm sorry.
Sorry,
Yeah.
October. But that might be the case. That might be what we have to do. Josh, at first blush, looking at these 4 bill drafts, are they fairly, is there one that's going to cause you to draft a 50-page bill? Or you feel like they're pretty straightforward?
Mr. Chairman, I believe they look like they should be pretty straightforward without knowing a whole lot about what the Oregon and Utah statutes look like. And as I dig into them, I can let you know, but certainly they sound like they should be reasonable.
Okay. All right. Any strong objection to drafting these 4 bills? All right, then is it Representative Ottman? Representative Ottman? Do you have a strong objection?
Oh, no, I before we vote, I have a question. Would this be the particular bill that would help for like large industry that is so far out that no utility really reaches them, and so that they may be able to produce? Would this help with that?
It's not, well, it could. It's not self-generation, but it's a third-party generation. So if there was
Oh, the third. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, it's third-party generation at the plant site within the fence. It's a little bit different than having wheeling across the state, which we permitted for the coal-fired facilities that go forward. That's actually on the books. So anyway, it could keep them going.
All right. Seeing no objection, we'll advance the 4 bill drafts to our next meeting.
And Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you want to deal with the resolution or not.
I think we should. That should be that should be dealt with next.
Can I mention what the clerks wanted? They've decided not to come here today. And Mr. Chairman, there was a court ruling about the distance from the campaign distance from the polls, and it causes a conflict in the law. So they would like to see a bill at our next meeting, and they were going to come here with a bill, but it just basically takes where it says 100 feet or 500 feet, and it changes that number. And it conforms to a court ruling. And I've been assured that that's all it is. And I hope that if I made a motion, that we keep that open as a placeholder to add to the election mix. And that's all it does. And it's a conforming amendment. Got a second?
Yep. I think Josh can track down that court case and get with the clerks if necessary. All those in favor of the bill draft, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Our resolution. Josh, are you going to present this to us? Read it to us in your best narrator voice.
So, Mr. Chairman, again, at our last meeting up in Douglas, there was discussion of sending a resolution to the Public Service Commission about the Rocky Mountain Power proposed rate increase. So this was a draft that was prepared by the office here, and I don't know if you want me to read all these whereas clauses one by one, or how you want me to do that. I certainly can.
Is everyone okay if we don't have Josh read the everywhere has clause? Okay.
So yeah.
All right.
As you can see, there are a number of whereas clauses, and then
My committee always does their homework, so they've all read this. I know that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So then the resolution, then at the end of the whereas clauses, now therefore be it resolved by the undersigned members of joint corporations. Section 1, that we oppose Rocky Mountain Power's proposed rate increase as detrimental to the well-being of our constituents and contrary to the public interest. Section 2, that we call upon the Public Service Commission to conduct a thorough and transparent review of Rocky Mountain Power's rate increase proposal, taking into consideration the impact it would have on Wyoming residents, businesses, and our state's overall economic stability. Section 3, that we urge the Public Service Commission to actively seek alternatives and solutions that would mitigate the financial burden on ratepayers while ensuring that Rocky Mountain Power remains a viable and responsible utility provider in our state. Be it further resolved that a copy of this be transmitted to the Public Service Commission, Rocky Mountain Power, and all relevant stakeholders expressing strong opposition of the Joint Corporations Committee to the proposed rate increase. We believe that it is our duty to protect the interests of Wyoming citizens and businesses, and we trust that the Public Service Commission will act in the best interest of our state's residents during its review of this proposal. So that's the resolution, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, the 1, 2, 3, 4th, whereas I thought it was 6 states. I thought there was a small amount of Idaho and some Rocky Mountain Power. Is that right or wrong?
Josh, I believe that's true, Mr. Chairman. We can change that. Mr. Chairman, the question was whether there were, in the 4th whereas clause, it notes there are 5 states. I believe that's incorrect, and we can correct that to 6 states, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Good catch. Questions for Josh? Senator Landon?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to bog us down. I don't mean to do that, but as we refer to California, Oregon, and Washington benefiting from our wind power, technically, Idaho and Utah do too, don't they? And I guess it doesn't matter. There's other things in here. We had time. We'd probably want to wordsmith a little bit, but I just throw that out. You could pretend like you didn't hear it.
No, I agree with it.
Mr. Chairman, that's, we could say, I think I agree with Senator Landon. I sort of think that, why don't we say something like, has dramatic impacts forcing Wyoming to sacrifice our landscape for the benefit of Rocky Mountain Power states, okay, something like that. And then that'll cover everybody, potentially ourselves too, you think about that. And then there's a little structural problem with this resolution. If you look at the second page, it was originally proposed as a signature resolution where we, like the informal resolutions we pass around on the floor. I feel that it would be better as a voted on resolution and that we wouldn't sign it individually, because we're going to have some folks that won't sign it and some that will. And you know, that's fair enough. They could look at the vote. But I think that the now therefore be it resolved clause, third paragraph on the second page needs to be changed to conform to the fact that it would be a voted on resolution. And so it'd be something like, now therefore approved by the members of the joint, but this resolution is approved by the members. And I'm not expecting everybody to vote for this, but I think if a majority of the committee supports it, that's good enough to send out.
All right, I agree.
Oh, and Mr. Chairman, I think the third from the bottom, whereas, I think it might be, that one says, whereas the Rocky Mountain Power proposal, this specific proposal doesn't include new transmission, except for it does in terms of the rate of return number, but it's too fine a point, and people have been talking about this today. You've heard them say over and over, it doesn't include transmission. Well, it includes a rate of return that's going to be on all the assets, including the transmission. So that's kind of not true. But on the other hand, I don't want to stick it out there where the press keeps picking up that this doesn't have anything to do with capital construction. Well, the rate of return has everything to do with the capital of the company. But I was proposing that we say something like, whereas Rocky Mountain Power is proposing, and not talking about the specifics of this case, to require citizen ratepayers of Wyoming to pay for costs of new transmission through period. And not say it's in the proposed rate increase. Because you heard them today, this is only the first of a series of things to get the transmission in. So maybe say, whereas Rocky Mountain Power is proposing that citizen ratepayers of Wyoming pay for the cost of new transmission. And I don't mean in this case, except for through the rate of return, but I do mean as part of their overall plan. Kind of finesses that. All of these are motions all wrapped up into one. Okay.
The omnibus motion. Senator Boner.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to say that there's quite a few whereas clauses, perhaps far too many, but I will support it based off of the three at the end, opposing the rate increase. We can disagree and have questions over all the things that have led to the proposed rate increase, but for now, I think it's best. I'm just going to focus on the be it resolved portion, not the whereas clauses. Like I said, I could pick about three things I disagree with in the whereas clauses, but for now, I'll support it simply because of the be it resolved portions. I think we probably would have been better off to have fewer whereas clauses, but I'm just going to be focused on the end of it, and I think that's something we can all unify around.
Whereas I think Senator Boner's right.
Thanks, Senator Boner. We're glad you're on board.
Question on syndication.
Yeah.
Jensen has his hand up.
Oh, Bob. From you, yes.
Thank you, and I don't mean to prolong things, but Bob Jensen, on behalf of American Clean Power, two 2 points. First of all, American Clean Power would like to go on record saying, we don't really think you need the resolution. Is really clear what the committee thinks about this rate increase and Rocky Mountain Power in general. It's been well documented in previous hearings.
Do you think they figured it out?
I think they get it. Not sure, but secondly, we're particularly opposed to the 5th, 6th, and 7th whereas statements. That are particularly subjective opinions, really not germane to the overall purpose of the resolution, and we'd strongly recommend that you remove those whereas statements from the resolution. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, just to be clear, that's the one that says Wyoming has some of the most unspoiled landscapes and intact ecosystems in the lower 48 states. Mr. Jensen, do you disagree with that?
No, but I don't think it's germane. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, Senator Case. I don't think
Mr.
it's germane
Jensen.
to the purpose of the resolution.
And
And
Mr. Chairman, the second one is the transition to renewable energy supplies has dramatic impacts, forcing Wyoming to sacrifice our landscapes for the benefit of states in the Rocky Mountain Service Territory who demand power but are reluctant to place their resources closer to them or pay for the impacts that cause to our beautiful state. You think that's true? Did you see the Reuters editorial a week ago that said that the new green energy on our landscape is a chance for Wyoming to redeem itself and make up for the fact that although California, Washington, and Oregon have lots and lots of open space, and Eastern Oregon and Washington look exactly like Wyoming in a lot of ways, and immense coastal resources, thousands of miles of coastland, they prefer to put their renewable power on our landscapes. Is that not a true statement or not?
Well, it's an opinion, Mr. Chairman and Senator Case. But again, we don't think it's germane to the real purpose of the resolution, which is about the rate increase.
And Mr. Chairman, one more, Wyoming is inadequately compensated for the placement of these renewable resources on our landscape. Now this committee will decide if we're compensated enough for that or not. We'll do it with a vote.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Mr. Kaysen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, Rick Kaysen with Rocky Mountain Power. I would direct, if you want this resolution, which we're not sure you really need, but if you want it to be accurate, I would direct you or ask you to take a look. I think it's the 6th whereas, 1, 2, 3, 4, where the suggestion was to address the Rocky Mountain Power States.
You're going to say it's the Pacific Power States?
I'm not going to say anything, but it's, if you want it to be accurate and you want to address all 6 states that are served, it's not Rocky Mountain Power States, which are Wyoming, Utah,
Yeah,
and Idaho.
Pacific Corp.
If you want all 6 states to be included, then you have to change the language, or suggest changing the
I
language.
think Pacific Corp is all 6. Pacific Power is the 3 western states in Rocky
Pacific,
Mountain.
that is correct, sir.
That's friendly, thank you.
See, I was listening today.
Utilities are smart people. They really are.
Additional public comment. All right. Any additional, we were in the middle of amendments. Any additional amendments to this resolution?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Scott?
did we vote on Senator Case's?
We're still on it. We jumped off, went to public comment and came back. It was a little unorthodox, but
Question on Senator Case's.
okay. All those in favor of the amendments signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, those amendments have been adopted.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to express my opinion that if we adopt this, we're committing ourselves, I think, to adopting some real legislation at the next meeting, because I think otherwise we will be rightly criticized for wasting our time on frivolous resolutions. I mean, we should have been passing bills that would actually do something about it. I think that criticism will be absent if we pass those bills. So I think we're putting pressure on ourselves for the next committee meeting, which I think is fine.
We've got 6 bills.
Yep.
That's a
Pass
lot.
most of them, we'll be all right. If we don't, we're gonna be embarrassed.
All right, question on the resolution. And this is a final, this is not to move it forward as a draft, this is to move it forward because of the timeline. We wouldn't have time to otherwise, so this will be a roll call vote.
No.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think it requires a roll call. It's not for legislation.
As a final action.
Yeah, all we're saying in the resolution is that a majority of the committee voted for it.
Yeah, it's not proposing to the legislature, it's proposing just for this committee.
And Mr. Chairman, it's really a resolution that the committee is backing our two
I see.
chairmen to send along to the Public Service
It's
Commission.
really
So,
just a letter.
It's a letter.
yeah,
okay.
it's really,
It's a letter with
Exactly.
committee whereas.
All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That was unanimously adopted. Let the record reflect.
I don't know. What a day, Mr. Chairman. You did a good job.
I'm used to splitting the day. That was a little exhausting.
That's why I like to split them. I think we should thank everybody that came.
Yep, thank you for coming out. Thank you for sticking with us. Appreciate all the testimony, all the input, and all the thoughts that have gone into the day. Help us shape some legislation that will impact our constituents in a positive manner.
And Mr. Chairman, I do think the debate was real. We did good work in the sense that our understanding's better, and so is the understanding of the people of Wyoming.
Amen. Josh, before we adjourn, is there any directive that you need clarification on? All right, with that, we are adjourned.
Be happy to, Charlie.